окупанти до нас в Україну. Форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у щах перегрівся навар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страны.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Їх доводи всяке озброєння різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів. Робить примар. Байрактар. Байрактар.
Future sometime.
Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 1033 of the news. And of course, it is a Sunday night fundraiser stream, and it's good to see you all once again. And today we have very big news of Ukraine escalating attacks on Russian oil, and also China placing a massive order for attack drones by 2026. And it's good to see you all once again.
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours of news from around the world, as we've gotten updates today that Ukrainian drone forces have continued to hammer Russian oil refineries and depots within the region of Rostov-on-Don, once again causing severe economic damage to the Russian Federation, and once again dealing a deadly blow to the Russian supply lines. Meanwhile, within the area of southern Russia, it appears that oil is continuing to seep up onto the beaches, and the toxic shock to the surrounding area from 3 oil vessels going down within 72 hours appears to be causing enough damage to actually kill off local fisheries and also mammals within the region, such as dolphins. This video footage was seen of that, unfortunately, today. Meanwhile, outside the area of Eastern Europe and inside of the area of East Asia, we were able to hear some very concerning news, as the People's Liberation Army has announced a order of 1 million kamikaze drones in an emergency order to be delivered to the People's Liberation Army by 2026. It does appear that once again these are preparations to flesh out and develop the ground fighting abilities of the People's Liberation Army ground forces, or the People's Liberation Army, which is a very complicated thing, but I'll explain that in a little bit. But nevertheless, it does seem as though they are still trying to prepare for some sort of a larger confrontation with the Republic of China on the island of Taiwan here within the future, as they're going to force a reunification in between Taiwan and the People's Republic of China. Meanwhile, outside of that, we have been able to get some small details and updates today out of the area of the Syrian interim government, as we are still hearing somewhat positive developments currently about what is going on inside of Syria and what may be working into the future on the relations in between Syria and the Western world. world. Meanwhile, on the actual front lines themselves, we have been able to see heavy Russian forces activity over the past 24 hours with high losses to boot. And not only that, it does appear that the Ukrainian armed forces have been able to hold their ground in all fronts, leading the Russians to have a final defeat on the very last day that we're going to be live on air before Christmas. And y'all heard that right. In case of you are here for the first time listening to this right now, we will be taking off from this day until December 26th. I have to say, before we even get into the news tonight, that pretty much with the beginning and end of this Christmas break here on the channel, this is pretty much the end of another streaming year, at least as far as we are concerned. And this year, unfortunately, we will not be able to do a Christmas address on Christmas Day. We simply lack the technological abilities, at least at the moment, to be able to make something like that. But I will say a very short speech to all of y'all right here to let y'all know a little bit about how this year has gone. I have to say that the Elite Spring Army and the Enforcer channel has gone above and beyond to incredibly amazing heights that we never expected. At the beginning of this year, the channel was fighting through the Dark Ages, as many of y'all will know through channel lore, where the channel had pretty much flatlined and was not really growing at all. We were also going through law school at the exact same time, which was incredibly stressful, and we really didn't even have time to think or breathe, much less even get sleep. We were getting about 4 hours of sleep a day. Since then, we dropped out of law school and started dedicating our time 100% to this channel and providing all of the news pretty much 7 days a week without end throughout the entirety of the year. Over the course of this 1 year, the channel has grown 175,000 subscribers, an additional 75 million views, and we've also raised a total of $1.5 million at this day on this fundraiser in support of Ukraine and other forces around the world. It is an absolutely incredible thing to think that we were able to make it to this point with each and every one of y'all, and I cannot say how honored Matthew and me are to be able to round out another third year of reporting with all of you once again and begin the fourth year when we return from the Christmas break and move on into the New Year's. It is absolutely an incredible thing, and I gotta say a huge thanks and a massive support to every single one of y'all who has joined us this year and all of the people who have been here with us for years as they have carried along the way really our voices and the amount of news and information that we've been able to give y'all for all of these years. And so with that,
indeed, huge shout out by the way from Enforcer Matt, by the way. I feel the exact same way. And also, just for a recap of 2024, we gained over 170,000 new subscribers this year, also 70 million plus new YouTube views, and also somewhere around 1.5 million raised for Ukrainian charity, and also no guests in the live stream. That's a big one as well. No guests whatsoever. It was just us two slogging away with the LSA, making it happen. And also, once again, huge shout out to everybody as well for getting us to that $1.5 million figure for charity raised. That is something that would not be possible without everybody on this channel chipping in, and we seriously do appreciate it very much. And tonight is going to be no exception.
And of course, we're going to be getting into the news immediately tonight because we know that a lot of y'all want to hear the last bit of news before we round out for the Christmas break. And so moving on into the first major bits of news that we have tonight, we are going to be moving on into the area of Rostov-on-Don, as we have been able to hear that major Ukrainian drone attacks have happened in this area, striking and destroying oil depots around the surrounding oblast. You see the flash of the explosion in the distance as a Ukrainian drone slams down, impacting the oil refinery and causing some significant damage. We were also able to see a couple of other flashes as well from another video angle, once again showing us the attacks as they were unfolding on film. Охуеть, блядь. Oh. That one actually was the brightest one right there at the very end. But moving on from that and into our next clip, we were also able to see that an ammo dump near to Novocherkassk was also hit as well by a Ukrainian drone, which resulted in a near-nuclear explosion from all of the munitions inside of the ammunition dump going up in flames in a single explosion. Here's the clip.
Dang, huge shockwave off of that one.
Is that Orville Redenbacher I'm hearing? Oh no, that's just Russians cooking. And that's the mushroom cloud right there rising from the ammunition depot explosion. But it does appear that this Ukrainian drone attack was successful in more ways than one, striking an ammunition depot and an oil depot within the same area of the Rostov Oblast, once again a vital corridor for Russian Federation forces fighting within the southern regions of Luhansk and throughout the entirety of Donetsk, as Rostov-on-Don is not only the command headquarters for the Southern Military Command, which is responsible for conducting the war in Ukraine, it is also a large logistics hub for pretty much all supplies transiting through Russia and into Ukraine, either all the way into Kherson and Zaporizhia, and especially into the Donetsk and Luhansk areas. We were also able to see, in a very rare instance, this was actually quite rare and I had to show this one, a Ka-52 actually ended up engaging Ukrainian drones that were attempting to attack these targets with an Igla and may have ended up shooting one of the drones down. But here's the clip. And there goes the Igla. And you can hear the Ka-52 off in the distance. You can actually see it right up there. Now, one thing that is really interesting about this, I don't know what was up with that woman at the end of the clip right there. She may have been a little bit more than just scared, but beyond that, the Ka-50 can be outfitted with air-to-air missiles. Interestingly enough, a lot of people do not know this about most modern helicopters, but most modern helicopters do have a way to outfit and equip different kinds of air-to-air weaponry. Generally, these are man-pads, however. They're nothing like, say, an R-77 or an R-73 that you would see on board, say, an Su-35 or anything along those lines. It's nothing that advanced, and I'm trying to see if I can find y'all a picture here, because what you're seeing here is not the air-to-air missiles I'm looking for. These are actually Vickers air-to-ground missiles, and generally are not used in an air-to-air role. I'm trying to see if I can find y'all really quickly the specific weapons loadout I'm speaking of here. Let's see. Maybe this will... Yeah, this actually does show it right here. You can actually see in this manual picture, an armament scheme for the Ka-52, this little thing right here in Cyrillic, the Igla V. And these are these air-to-air missiles that the helicopter is able to carry. They're not wildly advanced. They are quite literally man-pads installed into a special cradle, and the cradle is able to operate with the helicopter pilots inside the cockpit to be able to make sure that these Iglas can be fired from the helicopter itself. This is the only form of air defense that really any modern helicopter in the Russian Federation has, and not every single helicopter is capable of conducting an air-to-air sort of a role. Mi-8s in general are not able to do this sort of a thing, and also a lot of American helicopters are also not able to do this sort of a thing. But the AH-64 Apaches and the modernizations of the AH-1 Cobra, or the AH-1Z, they are actually able to conduct these forms of air defense roles. And let me see if I can find y'all, because I do want to show y'all this just to make sure that I back this up and prove this to y'all really quickly. I'm trying to find it. Well, I be dipped. Let's see here. Oh, man. Are you kidding me? They're not going to show a picture of it. Right when I'm like, hey, y'all, look at this cool thing, and then they don't have it. So let me see if eventually we can find it. Well, I'd be dipped. Do they never put these on helicopters? Because they're there, they exist, but there's a little Stinger pod, much like the ones that the Russians have for the Iglas. We also have the same thing, but for the AIM-92 Stinger, and I just cannot find it anywhere. This is wild. Let's see. Hang on, y'all. There's got to be one somewhere. It's not on this one. It's not on even the Israeli one. Well, I'd be dipped. Where in the world are they? Like, this is going to drive me. I have to look for this now. Hang tight, everyone. We have to find this, because I'm not going to leave until we... Oh, that's actually a really cool paint job right there.
Yeah, I like that paint job. That's pretty clean.
I'd be dipped, y'all. I cannot find this for the life of me. I'm looking at every single nationality's AH-64s. There are some that carry AIM-92s, and I've seen it before. And for some reason, I cannot find it now that I'm looking for it on the Wikipedia page. And usually Wikipedia has a pretty extensive bit of pictures showing off the weapon. You know what? Let me just go type it in. Let's see here. Let me take this off screen, and I'll go find it for y'all really quickly. AH-64 AIM-92s. So let me see if I can find those images. Here we go. Let's see here. Are you kidding me? Come on. Come on, work with me here. We got to find a good picture. We have to. Here we go. Oh my lord, I had to go all the way to Taiwan's Apaches to find them. But right over there, right there on the side of the load pylon, this isn't actually a wing, it's just a loading pylon to be able to carry weaponry, but on the side of that loading pylon, right over here, you can actually see the mounted AIM-92 Stingers in their own cradle that we have made in the West to be able to carry our own man-pads on board a helicopter. Generally, most helicopters never carry an a fixed wing version of an air-to-air missile. It's fairly rare. The AH-1Zs in the United States Marine Corps, which were operating for a good while, I believe they're still operating, actually do carry, I believe, AIM-9Xs, which is insane, to be entirely honest, that a helicopter's carrying a missile that powerful, at least in close-range combat of just a few miles away, but nevertheless, usually most of them carry man-pads. And this was one of the few times ever that we've ever seen a helicopter actually using its air-to-air loadout, and this was one of the few clips we've ever seen this. And there goes the Igla again. I mean, it's a wild thing to see this, just for the fact that it's very rare to even see them loading out helicopters in the air-to-air role like this, or much less for them to even be using this kind of weaponry. So that's why I wanted to show this. It's a very rare kind of a thing, and if you're kind of into like train spotting but in a military way, this was actually a very rare sight to see right here, and one that you probably will not be seeing again, most likely for months even, with how rare this actually ends up being. But nevertheless, it does seem as though, with the winter months now arriving once more, the Ukrainians are returning back to the tried and true tactic of simply obliterating Russian oil refineries and depots and trying to drive the Russian economy to its knees in the middle of winter, when oil consumption is at its highest. It does seem as though the Ukrainian forces may be returning back to these attacks on these forms of targets, and a lot of people seem to be believing that that is 100% the case. And Matthew, what are people thinking about that, and what are you thinking about that as well?
All right, so a whopping 79% of the audience said yes, Ukraine is returning to attacking Russian oil specifically, while 12% said maybe, but only time will tell, and 3% said no, these are isolated attacks. And I think what we've seen over the last couple of weeks is Ukraine is 100% returning to attacking Russian oil. I'm really not sure why they stopped, and maybe it was from U.S. pressuring them to stop attacking Russian oil, because of course, that was allegedly affecting U.S. oil prices, and the U.S. said, knock that off, we don't want that. We'd rather have Ukraine lose as a country than our oil prices go a little bit higher. So it sounds like maybe Ukraine's had a reversal on that position by the U.S., and now they're once again attacking Russian oil, which is a very good thing, because attacking Russian oil means attacking the Russian economy, which means a quicker end to the war. So I'm with the 80%, but Enforcer, what say you?
I'd have to say I'm with the 80% as well. Ukraine is 100% back to it. Hitting oil refineries and depots at this point in the conflict is one of the most effective things that Ukraine can do for the buck. There is no way that either side is winning a strategic battle on the front lines any longer. Simply, it is a defender's advantage in every single instance that a battle is breaking out at this point. If the Ukrainians conduct an offensive on the Russians, the offensive fails and the Ukrainians are defeated. If the Russians conduct an offensive on the Ukrainians, the Russians are defeated, the offensive fails. It is, at this point, quite literally a stalemate on the front lines, much like there was in World War I. There simply is no way to be able to win this war right now on the battlefield in Ukraine. And this means that all military attention on both sides is really being redirected away from the front lines and more so into trying to figure out how to bring the other nation to its knees without winning a strategic victory on the battlefield. And that means the Ukraine is looking at the only thing that keeps Russia alive, it being a homogenous economy, which would be its oil industry. That is the only way that Russia survives. It is not a diversified economy like the United States, which relies heavily on its oil and tech imports and exports and such things. It relies entirely on its oil exports. And that means if the Ukrainians are able to deal significant blows to the Russian oil industry, they are dealing a significant blow to the entire economy. Many Russian citizens are employed by these oil companies, and a lot of them are able to make additional income from their primary income provider, the oil companies. And when I say that, that sounds a little bit abstract, but when I explain, it makes a lot of sense. Russia makes all of their money off of the oil and gas companies. These oil and gas companies pay their workers a not so decent wage, but they still pay them a wage. These workers, after they pay their bills, have a little bit of expendable income. And when these workers go out and they go, what am I going to buy? They go buy liquor. And this keeps all the liquor stores in Russia in business. Now, if these oil companies are going under, or they're not able to really deal with the damages that they're facing in war, and they're taking significant monetary losses because of this, this means that they might not be paying their workers, or they might not be paying them enough anymore for them to have expendable income, or the company might just go under completely and all these people are unemployed. Either way it goes, those Russian workers no longer have money to pay the bills, much less to have expendable income. So then they're out of a house, meaning that the residential or the real estate development companies are now out of a lot of money because they're not able to rent out these apartments to people. And it also means that all of those additional companies that pretty much survived off of the Russian oil workers making their money, such as, say, the grocery stores, the liquor stores, and such things as that, they're all also not making a lot of money either, or they're making a very reduced amount of money, meaning that the entire economy, not economy, is being dragged down because of the Russian oil industry being hammered so significantly. And so I would say that this is 100% the strategy the Ukrainians return to, because it is a way to bring Russia to its knees without having to win a strategic victory on the battlefield. It is always important to remember when we speak of battle analysis here that there are really two ways to win a war. One is through attrition, and the other is through a strategic victory on the battlefield. Strategic victories on the battlefield pretty much have to be achieved at the very onset, usually within the first 6 months to a year of a war breaking out. The American Gulf War against Iraq in 1991 with coalition forces supporting the United States was one of those kinds of battles where it was pretty much a strategic victory on the battlefield. We quite literally defeated Saddam's armies and forces on the ground before a war of attrition could really begin at all. Of course, we did attrit them heavily before we even really pushed into the country and conducted the giant trapdoor, as Schwarzkopf would call it, and surrounded the entirety of the Iraqi army in Kuwait for the large part that survived. But still, the same point does exist. That was an aggressive war that resulted in a strategic victory. The Russians did attempt that at the beginning of the war in Ukraine, but it quickly fell apart, quite obviously, within the first 6 months after they had withdrawn from pretty much everything within the northern area of the country and were losing large amounts of ground within the Kharkiv Oblast and in Kherson due to Ukrainian lightning offensives that were retaking the territory. With this in mind, it was becoming clear that the war was not going to last that long because the defender, the Ukrainians, had an ability to fight back and actually hold territory. And with this in mind, the conflict started to shift to one where everyone was trying to still win a strategic victory, but there was a general understanding it was not going to be won immediately, to where a strategic victory or a quick and violent war would not be possible. It would be a long, grueling conflict. And now, as the war has gone on into its second and third year, both sides are starting to clearly see there is no way to win a strategic victory on the battlefields in Ukraine. The maps that we have showing the difference in the front lines in December of 2022 versus now, this is December of 2022 versus now, is a clear telltale indicator that no one can ever win a strategic conflict, a strategic victory on a battlefield inside of Ukraine. The Ukraine was not able to break the land bridge, and the Russians have been able to claim almost literally next to no new territory since 2022. This is showing that both sides have to be able to bring the other country, to its knees without actually doing it on the battlefield. This means that they have to deal severe economic or infrastructure damage to the other country to the point that the other's economy collapses, and this forces them into the negotiating table simply because they are no longer able to finance the war. So that is what we're seeing right now, and that is why the Ukrainians are going back to this strategy. It is the only thing at this point that probably will bring the Russian army and the Russian government, for the large part, to its knees and start rounding out this conflict once and for all. So, in my honest opinion, I think it's a good strategy, for one, and two, this is exactly what the Ukrainians are going back to. It's the tried and true and the classic for the large part. But moving on from that, and out of the Rostov-on-Don area, bled, we are now going to be moving on down into Novorossiysk, bled. Novorossiysk is a very interesting place. And it's not just interesting for the fact that this is really now the modern home of the Russian Navy at the Vostochny Rayon, which is a mooring outside of the major port of Novorossiysk, right here, where a lot of the Russian surface vessels are staying at the moment, including their submarine fleet, to try and stay out of range of Ukrainian attacks with storm shadows and Western weaponry. This also is a fairly significant port for Russian maritime traffic and is one of the larger ones that actually is inside of mainland Russia within the Black Sea area. As a matter of fact, it is the biggest one, excluding the illegally occupied Sevastopol at the moment. However, one thing that is interesting is that up in the area of the Kerch Strait, a decent while away, mind you, it's about approximately 65 miles away, had a significant oil spill happen as 3 oil tankers broke up and sank within the area of the Kerch Strait due to them simply not being built built to survive the extreme weather conditions of the Black Sea. With this in mind, oil has been spreading everywhere, and I showed you all yesterday a video of some people out on the beach with some shovels, shoveling up the sludge that was on the beach and trying to clean it up, although that might not be as easy as it seems. And it really doesn't seem that it will really be an easy one and done, shovel it into a burlap sack and then walk away with it kind of a deal, because now we're starting to see that there is major ecological damage that is beginning to occur. In this video, you will see a couple of dolphin carcasses. You can see one right there. These dolphins have apparently gone into toxic shock and died from the amount of oil that's been spilled into the sea, and it's killing them off. Dolphins and most mammals that are sea-based are generally very touchy. They're very sensitive to environmental changes, especially to oil being dumped into the surrounding seas. And we also understand that they're about as fragile as any fish that would also be used for economic purposes as well. From what we understand, this area of the Black Sea that is Russian-controlled and within an exclusive economic zone of the Russian Federation is being wrecked right now by the amount of oil that was dumped by these oil tankers. And understanding this in mind, we also would have a fairly good understanding that there's most likely going to be severe economic fallout for years, because all of the local fisheries will be pretty much destroyed due to the toxic shock that's been created from the oil spill.
Man, those damn Russians just killing all the wildlife and everything. Like, they're running the Black Sea at this point with the oil spill.
Yeah, it's a sad thing, but it's also another thing, and this is something, thinking about it more so outside of a humanitarian sense, that, you know, these poor dolphins ended up, you know, pretty much choking to death on oil and washing up on shore, which is a very unfortunate thing. There is actually a bit of a silver lining to this, in a sense, at least in the conflict. These dolphins are dying much like any other fish are right now within the Black Sea in this localized area. The Russians control this area as a part of their exclusive economic zone, meaning that these waters are specially identified for the Russian Federation to be able to conduct economic maritime activities in, such as commercial fishing. And the fact that this oil spill has killed off the dolphins and most likely large schools of fish that were living within this area of the Black Sea as well, this means that the entirety of the Russian fishing fleet that would go to sea in these areas to be able to fish from these waters will no longer have access to the bountiful sea harvests that they would have had in years prior. And this does mean that local fisheries will be devastated economically by the fallout of Russian incompetence for the large part, and this may also mean that a regional depression begins within this area, which will start to once again drag the Russian Federation down just a little bit further because of the economic damage that they created themselves. It's a pretty crazy thing, because back in the day, we used to hear that the Ukrainians claimed that the Russians were conducting ecological terrorism on them, or environmental terrorism, and now it appears that the Russian Federation is conducting environmental terrorism on itself. What a cruel twist of fate for the Russians, but still a pretty well-deserved one at this point. But nevertheless, we are going to be moving out of Ukraine for a little while and actually moving on over into East Asia. Matthew, get that question cooking, because it's going to be time to start asking folks what they're thinking about this. Many of y'all will know that the East Asian area, while fairly quiet at least right now, is usually always simmering with rising tensions in between two parties in the area, that being the North and South Koreans on the Korean Peninsula, although those tensions, to be entirely honest with you all, have somewhat died off, at least recently, due to the whole Yoon Suk-yeol business inside of South Korea, and it also appears that the tensions are continuously rising in between China and Taiwan, as China has resorted to more forms of low-level coercion against the Republic of China on the island of Taiwan, to try and force them into some sort of meaningful negotiations on a one-state, two-systems agreement that the People's Republic of China continues to press forward onto the Taiwanese. It now appears, at least as recently, they are still once again seeing that the United Front and persuasion tactics that they have tried for decades now are simply not working. And with the possible advent of a brand new administration in the United States coming in, and possibly even further militarily supporting the Republic of China, it appears that the Chinese are seriously considering aggressive and quick action at this moment to seize the diplomatic advantage and to once again try and get the Republic of China to reunite with the mainland Communist Chinese, Chinese in the People's Republic of China. According to information that we've been able to get today, an emergency order has been placed by the People's Liberation Army for 1 million kamikaze drones to be used by the armed forces in the future, and for these orders to be delivered by 2026. It is a very interesting kind of a thing, and it is once again showing us that the People's Liberation Army is trying to rapidly modernize. While they are getting a lot of these drones integrated into their armed forces, force integration is something that takes a little while, most likely a year or two, meaning that while they may have these drones in bulk by 2026, it most likely will be around 2028 or 2029 by the time that these drones are actually effective and a very viable weapon system within the People's Liberation Army. Kamikaze drones are fairly new to really any armed force around the world currently, and we have seen that the Ukrainians have had to quickly master the concept, and generally at this point they are the unmitigated rulers of the skies with their kamikaze drones in warfare, but many other countries, including the United States, the Russian Federation, and the People's Republic of China, are quickly trying to play catch-up, learning lessons from the war in Ukraine, and making sure to try and integrate these forms of weapon systems into their militaries, but to also try and make them far more effective and far more thought out on a doctrinal level than the Ukrainians or the Russians have ever done so far. And it does look as though the Chinese are once again moving in the direction that they are trying to get a large new ability integrated into the People's Liberation Army as a whole, so that way they can use it in the future against their possible adversaries. And really the only adversary that is currently being eyeballed at the moment is the Republic of China on the island of Taiwan. Generally, while Taiwan, while the Communist Chinese in the mainland have very strained relationships with the Indians, there really is no chance of that turning into a major conflict or a skirmish anytime in the future. There will be skirmishes on the border where some people will get brained to death with a cane, but that's nothing compared to what might happen with Taiwan, considering that China actually has a unlegitimate but still seriously concerning claim on the island of Taiwan as being a part of the Communist Chinese mainland. Also, another thing that would force this to an inevitable head is if there is a government change inside of the Republic of China on the island of Taiwan in the future, which may be possible, at least here within the very near future. There is an incoming election inside of Taiwan, and there are certain political factions that largely represent the majority currently of the Taiwanese political opinion, at least inside of their country, that are heavily for declaring independence. To really quickly explain to y'all the situation in between the Communist Chinese and the Democratic Chinese on the island of Taiwan, the two countries consider themselves to be the same thing. And that's something that's very complicated and very tough for people to understand, because they hear China and Taiwan, it sounds like two totally different entities. Taiwan is called the Republic of China, technically. And the Republic of China claims that they control the entirety of mainland China, and the People's Republic of China, also just called China, is an illegitimate communist regime that controls what the Republic of China on the island of Taiwan truly owns. The Communist Chinese on the mainland of China claim that they are the rightful rulers of all of China, and in the course of the Civil War from 1945 to 1949 were able to defeat the wicked and corrupt forces of the landlords and the bureaucrats that were in the Republic of China and Chiang Kai-shek's armies, and forced them into the sea to the island of Taiwan. And this is only a continuance of that Civil War that ended in 1949, as they're going to try and reclaim the island of Taiwan and bring it under Communist Chinese rule. Those are the two different sides to this equation, and for the large part, both of them actually call themselves Chinese. Much like North and South Korea have the names Korea in them, and their official names both also have Korea in it as well, the official names of Taiwan and China also both have the name China in them. Taiwan is officially called the Republic of China, and the Communist Chinese are called the People's Republic of China. With this in mind, you can clearly see here that that is really where the crux of the issue lies. The Taiwanese do not consider themselves to be an independent country from mainland China, and the Communist Chinese also don't really consider that to be the case either, and that's also how the situation is understood around the rest of the world. However, Taiwan is obviously not a part of Communist China, and in the future there has been a lot of political parties and factions inside of the Republic of China's government that has been wanting to move towards a declaration of independence from the Chinese as a whole. They do not want to view themselves as the Republic of China any longer. They want to want to view themselves as the Republic of Taiwan, a completely separate entity from the Chinese and a completely independent nation. The Communist Chinese do not want that at all, because of the Taiwanese recognize themselves as an independent country separate from the idea of China as just an abstract concept. This means that this allows every single country in the world right now who has picked the Communist Chinese to be the legitimate China over Taiwan, they now will be able to recognize officially Taiwan as a legitimate independent country and also officially recognize the Communist Chinese as an official legitimate country at the exact same time. This means if the Chinese ever want to reunify Taiwan from that point, they would be conducting an illegal invasion of a sovereign country, as that's what it would be recognized as across the entire world. Right now, that's not the case. Even in the United States, in our diplomatic understanding, that is not the case. But it does appear that with the Chinese getting a million kamikaze drones in this emergency order, they are certainly going to be possibly giving it a shot to forcibly reunify Taiwan with the mainland without this diplomatic incident finally evolving. But Matthew, what are people thinking about this, and what are you thinking about it as well? Does it look like they're about to go to war or not?
All right, so 72% of the audience said China is preparing to wage war by ordering 1 million kamikaze drones to be delivered within a year, while 16% said China is just arming its military like everybody else, and 7% said it sounds like another hype story. And when I heard this one earlier, I was like, wow, they ordered 1 million kamikaze drones of a specific type, specifically to wage war. That was my first initial thought, and I think that China is indeed trying to wage war in the coming years here, and we've been hearing that, of course, that they're going to invade Taiwan, and I think they're actually going to pull that off. And this order right here indicates they are getting ready for something, and the only thing right now that they're really eyeballing is Taiwan. And I think they're going to probably go for it in the coming years, and this is more proof of it. So I'm with the 72%. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say that China is most likely preparing for war. I would still say, though, that this isn't going to be happening next year in 2026, because integrating this kind of an ability into an armed force takes a pretty good while. There are some things that you would think are very simple in the military, like talking on a radio, that takes years for people to be able to get a hang of and also create a uniform communication system inside of the U.S. military. I personally know, because I talk to a lot of those people, and they tell me that they've been in for years and they still have not completed this single integration of a new kind of a technology or a new kind of an ability. It takes a very long time to be able to really flesh out all of the issues with a new idea or a new weapon system being integrated into a military. And for this reason, we do know that this will not be ready by next year. They may have the drones by next year, will not mean by a single instance that they're ready to use them by next year. However, with how these drones are going to be integrated in time for something else that's going to happen, it does show that they're still getting ready for an invasion. The Chinese Navy is expected by 2029, which is about the same time that we would expect that this drone attack concept of kamikaze drones will finally be fleshed out in the Chinese army, to also have a fully operational Navy by that time. So that means that at this point, working on the timetable we understand in the West, the kamikaze drones and the Chinese Navy would both be force competent to be able to invade Taiwan by that point. And that is what's concerning about it, is that they're fleshing out what may be put under the People's Liberation Army rocket forces, I'm assuming, because I do not think that this would be integrated under the ground forces. This sounds more like a strategic thing, so it would probably be under the rocket forces responsibility, but it sounds as though they're trying to give the strategic rocket forces a additional ability to strike the Taiwanese with a cheaper and as effective option than the more expensive missiles that the PLA is currently operating at the moment. And this is once again trying to make sure that they can deal deadly blows to the Republic of China in the opening hours and days of a conflict, so that way the Navy and the Army, when attempting an amphibious assault of the island, will be facing far less resistance in the future. That's generally what I would be seeing at the moment. That seems to make the most sense, and it is a fairly concerning thing that it looks as though it's going down that route. But we will be waiting to see how this actually goes. But still, while the Chinese are preparing for an invasion, I'm generally assuming that if they ever attempt a war with Taiwan, it most likely will be happening towards the later end of 2020, towards the 2020s or the very beginning of the 2030s. But still, I have seen a lot of people talk about something else, something very interesting. Would China still invade Taiwan if TSMC ended operations on the island? And a lot of people are actually talking about this in the moment. And Matthew, what are people thinking about this, and what are you thinking as well?
All right, and this question right here was inspired by a little discussion being had in the live chat about this issue, and personally, I'm a bit on the fence, but it looks like about 82% of the audience said yes, China would still invade Taiwan if TSMC, the chip manufacturer, ended operations on the island, while 18% said no, that China would still not invade. And honestly, if I had to pick an option here, I would say that I think China would go ahead and invade Taiwan for several different reasons. First of all, they simply want to say that they've reunified Taiwan and that which once again China's place. That's what they want to say. And also, I don't think the US would really step in and really defend Taiwan that strongly if TSMC was off the island, because ultimately the main prize on the island is the fact that the world's greatest chip manufacturer is there, and that's why the US is putting so much effort into defending it, and that's why China wants it so bad. So ultimately, I think the U.S. would generally step away if TSMC ended operations there, and China would simply move in, take it, and that would be probably the end of it. So I'm with the 82%. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say I'm with the 82% as well. For political aspirations in the People's Republic of China and the realization of the communist image laid out by Mao Zedong, that the Chinese Communist Party would be the ruler of all of China, this would still be realized in the future whether TSMC was there or not. This was an issue well before TSMC ever even existed, because there was no such thing as a semiconductor chip in 1949 when the Civil War ended, and the Communist Chinese were already saying that they were going to invade the island then, and all the way up through the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and then the 80s when TSMC finally started to exist, the 90s to 2000s to 2010s, and now to the 2020s. This is something that the Chinese would do whether TSMC is there or not. It has a lot to do with the ideological beliefs and ideals of the Chinese Communist Party and what they believe they must achieve to realize the rejuvenation, the national rejuvenation of the Chinese people, and also for them to be able to end the century of shame, which it's called inside of China, where the Chinese were pretty much controlled by outside powers and foreign intervention, from what they call it. But nevertheless, this is something they'd still do. It doesn't mean, though, that the United States would leave them behind. I still believe that the United States would heavily defend Taiwan, because even without TSMC on the island and manufacturing side of the United States at that point, the island of Taiwan is incredibly important to Chinese containment and ensuring that the Chinese are not able to have an open ability to sail into the Pacific Ocean and cause havoc on maritime shipping channels as easily if an outbreak of a conventional war was to happen in the future. Not only that, we are also able to contain the Chinese Navy and ensure that they are not able to power project into the area of the Indian Ocean, which would help them to far easily protect their sphere of influence in the future that they're attempting to create right now, and we would largely be able to stop that dead before it could even happen, making sure to keep Taiwan a part of the Western world and a part of our containment chain that consists of Japan, South Korea, the Japanese chain islands heading down to Taiwan, the Philippines, as well as the area around the Java Sea, which would include Indonesia.
I personally think that if it wasn't for the industrial interest on the island of Taiwan, I think the U.S. would not be so vigilant in trying to defend it. And honestly, with the last 4 years or so, we haven't even been vigilant on defending Taiwan, even with TSMC on the island. So maybe things are going to change in the upcoming 4 years or something like that. But I personally think that without the chip manufacturing, the U.S. would not nearly be as vigilant with trying to defend the island. Generally, I think they would back off. And probably if China wanted to take it, we'd probably simply let it happen. We'd condemn it, but we would not actually step in and militarily stop it.
I would actually have to disagree, because historically there are a lot of instances where the United States openly backed and defended the island of Taiwan, the Republic of China, against the Communist Chinese, such as the Taiwan Strait crises of 1954 and 1955 and 1958, which saw us actually create, to really quickly try and get it here, the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, which was our version for a while of the Asian form of NATO, to try and be able to contain and stop the communist threat through American or Western aligned countries within the region, including the Republic of China on Taiwan. We also saw that the U.S. military was actively involved in supporting and arming the Republic of China's military during this time, and that U.S. forces were usually not that far away, just in case of the People's Republic of China attempted something with the island. As James Hughes throws in a massive 500. Good Lord! And when the world
James Hughes, look at that.
When the world does that bring the fundraiser up to? I can't even see it. What does it bring it up to, Matthew?
2,340 $44 raised. We are so close to the $2,500 goal. We just need a couple hundred more dollars, and we'll be smashing it.
Holy moly, holy smokes. But nevertheless, I gotta say, absolutely crazy right there. Chat, this is crazy, chat. This is insane, chat. And I also gotta say that it is a wonderful, absolutely incredible to have this little bit of history before us, because it does show that the United States historically protected and supported the island of Taiwan, although there was no such thing as TSMC in the 50s. At least that's what my take would be, because we've historically defended them in the past when there really was no economic significance to Taiwan at all, and I have a feeling that that will most likely continue today, because much like back then, we're looking at containing the Chinese. So really the strategic picture is pretty much identical to what it was back in the 50s in the present day, and this means that our reinvigoration of the defense of Taiwan would probably come to fruition, because it's a strategic imperative and not just an industrial and economic imperative.
Maybe so. Me personally, I would say the 1950s was a much different time, and our policy was a lot more aggressive in the 1950s than right now. Even with a more aggressive policy than what we currently have right now in 2024, I would personally say that we would generally not come into Taiwan's aid, because once again, we are still dealing with the Putin threat inside of Ukraine, and that would be our utmost priority to make sure that that situation's under control. And without some sort of real economic incentive to go and defend Taiwan, I think that the next 4 years of administration might decide that Taiwan is not at the top of the list, and even though it would be nice to contain China, that would probably not be a top priority.
Well, you're saying the next 4 years of the incoming administration?
Yes.
I would highly doubt that, because they generally don't have good relations with the Chinese at all.
Yeah, that's on an economic front, not a military front.
Well, usually the economic front is, the military front is an extension of the economic front. I mean, if you're not doing economically well with someone, militarily, you generally wouldn't do well. Oh, wait a minute, did we pass the goal?
We smashed the goal!
Oh,
Look at that! 2,565! Dang! Jaga, jaga, Igor! We smashed that goal about 55 minutes into the stream. Look at that!
That is absolutely crazy, folks. Crazy. And I got to give a huge shout out to all of y'all. Absolutely incredible. We have gotten past $2,500 raised on this fundraiser. What an amazing thing. Absolutely incredible. And I got to give a huge shout out to the entirety of the LSA once again for conducting this revolutionary success and victory. Because if it wasn't for all of y'all, we wouldn't have been able to hit this fundraiser goal and be able to say that the Leaf Spring Army will never truly die, and it will continue to support Western interests around the world, hell or high water. But getting on back to this conversation here about the Taiwanese, did you know, Matthew, as a historical precedent here, because you're saying that on the economic front they don't have good relations and that has nothing to do with the military. We didn't have good relations with Japan before Pearl Harbor on an economic level, and then that translated over into the military level because they bombed Pearl Harbor because of that.
That's true, but they bombed our stuff. If they go bomb Taiwan, that is not necessarily us. That would be a different country and not the United States. I still feel the U.S. would not go to war with China over Taiwan. It would have to be something much more serious than that to actually go directly with war with China. That's a very big step to take, and I don't think we would take it over Taiwan.
But in the 90s, though, we had a pretty significant relationship with the Chinese economically then because of what happened in the 70s. And then the Chinese fired some rockets into the waters of Taiwan, and we sent 2 carrier task groups to stand down the Chinese and stop them from beginning a full-blown war with the Taiwanese then. And that was in the middle of U.S. and American economic relations growing. And such an action could have completely jeopardized U.S. and American economic interests, but we still went forward with that. And I would say that really the historical precedent has shown that regardless of our relationship with the Chinese, we're always willing to protect the Taiwanese. And I would think that the United States would still be firmly backing that in the present day, especially considering that it wouldn't make any sense to be on uneven terms with them on an economic front and then for some reason be on amicable terms with them on a military front. That would seem to be completely opposite. I mean, with the Russians, we're on a bad front with them economically because of what they did militarily. They're almost a hand-in-hand kind of a thing, you know.
So let me just get it straight. So what do you think that a Taiwan defense would look like from the U.S. perspective if, let's say, China invaded Taiwan tomorrow? Let's say they went in there and started trying to take the island. Do you think the U.S. would send in ground forces, or what do you think that would look like?
I think we would probably try and protect their skies with the Navy, because there's really no ground invasion that would happen tomorrow, because
So shoot down a Chinese vessel or a Chinese ship, you're saying?
Well, yeah, they would shoot down a Chinese plane. The ships don't fly; the planes fly. We would most likely be shooting down Chinese missiles that would be flying into the airspace of Taiwan. I would assume.
So, and that would drag us into a direct war with China, though.
Yeah, but that's generally why the Chinese aren't going to get into a war, though, because we are constantly conducting some form of an armed standoff in a not so direct way with the Chinese by making sure that we back the Taiwanese. In a situation like that, the Chinese have pretty much rebuffed our armed stand down, and they're firing on the Taiwanese automatically. I mean, we're not almost, we're always in the area around Taiwan, in extension through Japan, and so if
We are we are around Taiwan, but we would not fire on China. I guarantee you that. Over the island of Taiwan, we would not go to war with China over that. You can mark my words.
I would doubt that a lot. A great deal actually, because generally it's the incoming. Well, really, it's not just the incoming administration. It was the current one and the incoming one that have both really put forward very quietly this Chinese containment policy. Under the prior administration, before this one, they were actively conducting a trade war with the People's Republic of China. Under this current administration, we've seen that U.S. air bases have been built along the Japanese island chains as well as in the northern Philippines, once again furthering this policy of Chinese containment. And now with the incoming administration, again, we're already hearing that there's going to be another trade war beginning again, most likely, with the People's Republic of China, which will once again further worsen the diplomatic relations and will automatically correlate to rising military tensions in the region, as the People's Republic of China will not be trying to work amicably with the United States, which is Taiwan's defensive backer. They'll more so be acting aggressively, most likely as an extension of the economic worsening of relations. So with that in mind, I would say that if that was to happen, the United States would automatically respond, most likely by conducting an armed standoff to even stop an event where the Chinese would attack Taiwan in the first place, like we've historically done every single time in the past.
I mean, in my opinion, while we do Chinese containment, obviously we're trying to keep China contained. We're not trying to let them spread. So far, we've done nothing to indicate we're willing to go to a direct conflict with them, because that would mean very bad things if we went to a direct war with China for everybody. Even though we may win the war, it's going to be very costly. And for us to do something that costly for our side and risk losing so many men and so much equipment, and also weakening both economies, because we're basically a symbiotic economy at this point with China. So you can't just decouple from that. That would be extremely damaging to both of us, and really nobody would win that. And for us to get into something that bad, where it's almost a mutual destruction, it would have to be something much more severe than Taiwan as just the island itself. Now, if TSMC is still there and TSMC has not been brought to the United States, then we might have an incentive to fight to the death over Taiwan, because without the chips, our economy is going to suffer, and also China's is going to suffer as well, but mainly the U.S. economy, because we don't get the TSMC chips once China takes over that island. So, me personally, I don't see going to war without TSMC being removed from the island first, but that's just me.
So, if that is true, Matthew, that we have such an economic relationship, Taiwan is pretty much gone to the wind at this point. The Chinese could just take them at any point. Why haven't they done that over the past 20 years when the United States and China were quite literally economically connected to the hip? Why wouldn't they have done that then? Because that would have been the best justification to have, considering that, quite literally, the United States, well, China was the United States' main priority trading partner, not Mexico and not Canada like it is now, where China is the number 3 trading partner. They were number 1 for the past 16 years. Why wouldn't they have conducted an invasion of Taiwan then, considering that they quite truly had a stranglehold over the trade relationship in between the two countries?
It could be that China wasn't ready to launch the invasion militarily. That could be a big part of it, because over the last 10 years or so, China has strengthened their military tenfold over. And right now, they're placing these massive orders for drones, indicating they need more equipment to be able to pull off an invasion. And they currently don't have that right now. So they probably weren't militarily ready for it. Even though they had the economic leverage, they didn't have the military leverage to pull it off.
Maybe that would be the case. Like that actually is supported generally, that they didn't have those kinds of military abilities. But at the same time, though, I don't think they would actively invade Taiwan as long as as long as we stand them down before anything like that would happen, instead of just kind of sitting on our ass like we did with Ukraine, where no one did anything until they were invaded. If we actively stood them down, they will not invade Taiwan. That's always been the case in the past. And on top of that, the Chinese would understand that they're playing they're playing a game of suicide at that point, because if they do invade Taiwan and the United States does go to war with them, the Chinese economy, which is in very rough shape at this point, would implode, and the U.S. economy, which is also in somewhat difficult shape at this point, would most likely go through a major economic depression. Then the question at that point is, are they willing to blast themselves pretty much in the head to try and take the island of Taiwan? And the answer to that, knowing the Chinese, at least historically, would most likely be a pretty resounding no, and they would return back to the diplomatic negotiating table again of just trying to persuade the Taiwanese that a one country, two systems model would probably work pretty good.
But that basically assumes that that China is going to call our bluff per se. And the big question is, like the whole debate's about right now, is the U.S. bluffing or not? Would we actually go in there and defend Taiwan on the ground no matter what the circumstances are? Or could China go in there and invade and simply take it? And then the U.S. would say, we condemn that, we don't like it, but at the same time, Taiwan is on their own. And right now, we don't really know the answer to that question. So far, it's been flip-flopping over the last 4 years. We really don't know what it was going to be at this point. There were some times that people were saying, oh, we would go and invade, or we would help Taiwan if they got invaded. And then there were certain times where we said, oh, we're not really sure. We'd have to re-examine the treaty and the policy and all that stuff. We might not be able to help Taiwan. It just depends. So honestly, it just depends on the circumstance of the moment. If the Ukraine-Russia war starts taking off like crazy and that starts heating up to the point where it looks like it could escalate beyond Ukraine, that would also influence whether or not the U.S. would be willing to jump into Taiwan. So it depends on the circumstances coming up, and it also depends on whether or not China would call our bluff, if it is indeed a bluff.
That is a good point, and I actually would like to see, Matthew, a poll on that. Let's ask the folks in the chat what they think. Do you think, do all of y'all think that the United States would actively come to the defense of Taiwan in the outbreak of a conventional war, or do y'all think that we wouldn't? Or do y'all think that we would try and do something in between like we did with Ukraine, where we didn't actively stand down? Well, actually, here's the options, man. Let's put these down as the options. 1, the United States conducts an armed standoff. War does not happen. 2, the United States does not conduct an armed standoff. China takes Taiwan uncontested. 3, the United States provides arms support to the Taiwanese, no direct military involvement. Or 4, the United States allows the war to begin, conducts direct military involvement, getting involved in the conflict entirely. That would be that would be 4 likely outcomes as to what the United States could do. And I'm wondering what folks are believing out of those 4 options would happen. That would be pretty interesting.
Yeah, let me tweak the options here for a second, because some of those don't fit, and also some of them I think need to be reworded. So let me reword them real quick, and that will be up here in just a second.
And so we will be waiting to see, and I want to see what y'all are thinking about this, because it's a very interesting discussion that Matthew and me are having. It looks like we're on 2 different sides of the, not 2 different sides of the aisle, that's a really political sounding thing, 2 different sides of the fence here looking at this whole thing, but I'm wondering what y'all are thinking out there in the audience. Are y'all thinking more on Matthew's line of thinking or mine? Because, to be entirely honest, I'm pretty dead set in what I'm thinking at the moment, and Matthew is as well, but there is still a good argument to be had. There is a good argument on Matthew's side or my side, so I'm wondering what y'all are thinking. What's more believable or convincing? The United States would actively support the Taiwanese wholeheartedly, something in between, or not support them at all and just to give them over to the Chinese pretty much without a fight? That's what I am wondering right now, and hopefully while I'm filibustering, Matthew will be having that question up really soon so that way we can move on to another news topic inside of Syria before we get on into the really heavily laden down Ukraine war news. So hopefully we'll be able to have that soon. And also, there we go, we finally got it. And also, let's see. Oh, Matthew, that was a great way to word those. By the way, I was looking at them. I was like,
I was having trouble with them for a minute there, because 2 of them actually meant the same thing basically. So I tried to reword it to say a bluff on the first one. The other ones, I think they line up pretty good now. There are 4 even options here, folks. So no unsure option. You have to pick.
And so with that, now that we got all of y'all in on the conversation yourselves, and y'all will be able to throw in your opinions on that, we're actually going to be moving on out of East Asia for a little while. We'll circle back to this here in a moment. And we're going to be moving on into Syria, because a lot of y'all did say that you wanted to hear some Syrian interim government news. And we did get some Syrian interim government news today, which is sounding fairly good. Very good. 1 second, everyone. Hold up. Hold up. I'm about to sneeze, folks. Hang on here. Hang on. Hold up. Oh, whoop. Okay, I'm not sure if I'm going to or I'm not, but I'm going to try and go forward like I'm not. So, according... Dang it. Okay,
Oh,
so
damn. Bless you. Bless you.
according to the news that we got today, they are calling it in Iran International, which, by the way, is a Western-aligned journalist organization. It's not Iranian-aligned. That the interim government of Syria, they're calling it the new government of Syria, has decided in recent days to prevent all Iranian planes, including civilian ones, from flying over Syrian skies, according to an Israeli news website, Walla, which reported this on today. According to a direct quote, the rebels' decision will make it very difficult for Hezbollah to restore its military capabilities, according to a report. This is a very interesting bombshell announcement by the Syrian interim government, as this is meaning that not only can the Iranians not use Syria as a supply hub to continue to keep Hezbollah functioning, but it also means that the Syrian interim government somehow has some sort of an air defense ability that the Israelis didn't bomb into oblivion about last week, and it means that they're also going to be ensuring that no Iranian aircraft fly over Syria into Lebanon to be able to continue to support Hezbollah forces and rearm them and also restock them with brand new cash to be able to buy whatever they need as their operations go on. This is a very big thing, and it is showing that Syria is largely moving away from the pro-Iranian and Russian-aligned Assad regime past, and once again trying to position itself or jockey itself to be more Western-aligned. Also, at the moment, I would like to make it fairly clear, we have not seen anything from the interim government so far suggesting that they are going to become Turkish-aligned. In fact, it does not seem that they have good relations with the Turks entirely, and a lot of people have heard some very different and confusing things. It doesn't really seem as though the HTS is that big into Turkey as people originally assumed, and it doesn't appear that the Syrians, well, the Assad regime collapsed for a new Turkish-aligned regime to take its place. It still does largely appear that it is trying to move towards a Western direction. So if we give it a little bit of a nudge, it might move in the Western direction completely. Or it may turn into some form of an Islamic emirate and really be like any other country that's currently inside the Middle East, which is an Islamic emirate, but it gets American security assurances and then becomes Western-aligned economically and militarily for those reasons. We were also able to hear another interesting statement as well, that apparently, according to what Jelani said today, which still appears to be a leading figure within the interim government, the factions will announce their dissolution, meaning all of the rebel factions, which are still in the process of dismembering themselves at the moment, and all of the weapons will be handed to state control of the interim government, which will then be responsible for building a new armed force for the Syrian Republic or the Syrian Emirate of the future. So it does still appear that they are once again working towards creating a unified Syrian state. But another thing that's really important here that we are going to understand from this, at least on a political level inside of Syria, is that for all of these rebel factions to hand over their arms in the future and currently be in the process of dismembering themselves to do that right now, it is showing that the interim government has enough representation from all different rebel factions that all rebel factions are generally pleased with the direction that the interim government is heading in and that they're willing to give up their weapons. This means that democratic groups like the SDF and the Syrian Free Army have been able to get enough assurances, at least in the interim government, that basic rights of individual ethnic groups will be respected throughout the country. And for this reason, they feel that it is a safe call to be able to give up their weapons so that way they are able to once again bring about a unified governance system in Syria that will largely form an emirate or a republic, but still will not be a full-on emirate like you would imagine in the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria to look like back in the mid-2010s. The Islamic Emirate I'm talking about is something a lot like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, or the Kingdom of Qatar. These are Islamic Emirates, whether people know it or not. They are headed by royal Arabian families from the Arabian Peninsula. They follow some very strict, in the case of Saudi Arabia, incredibly strict Islamic laws and traditions, but there is still a modicum of some religious tolerance allowed in the country for people who may not be Islamic. That may be what the Syrian interim government forms into as its final actual full-fledged governmental form in the future. In the worst case scenario, in the best case scenario, it may be some form of a federal republic, but it really allows a lot of independent autonomy throughout the different regions of Syria. So that way they govern themselves according to the ethnicities and cultures that exist within these areas and the religious ideologies as well. This may mean that the federal government of Syria would be somewhat weaker, and there would be a lot more power instilled inside of the more so semi-dependent but more so independent states that would make up Syria into the future. It does seem as though it's still a fairly good direction for them to be moving into, but before we continue to talk about the Syrian situation at the moment, we have gotten enough input at the moment to see what everyone in the audience is thinking right now about what will happen with Taiwan in the future if a possible armed conflict was on the horizon and inevitable. And so, Matthew, what are people currently thinking about this, and what are you thinking about the outcome as well?
All right, so just to recap the poll question, it says, do you think the U.S. would come to the aid of Taiwan in a direct conflict? So, believe it or not, it's actually almost half and half. There's about 6% leaning toward the side of the enforcer, but it's nearly split. So, 56% said Taiwan war begins and the U.S. would get involved militarily, while 28% said the U.S. would provide armed support only and not get involved on the ground, while 8% said the U.S. would back off and let China invade and that would be the end of it, and 8% said no, the U.S. would conduct a bluff on China and hopefully China would fall for the bluff. And I would say this, I'm still going to hold steady on my ground. I think that the U.S. would provide arms support, similar to what we're doing in Ukraine. We would send arms to Taiwan to help them to try to defend their territory, but we would not get involved on the ground unless TSMC was still operating there and they have not moved their operations to the United States at the point of invasion. That would be the only caveat to my opinion there. But I don't think the U.S. would go in on the ground and start basically fighting the Chinese directly. That would mean a direct war with China, which would destroy the Chinese economy and the U.S. economy, and I don't think we would jump into the fire just like that over Taiwan. But, Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say Matthew, I think you may be misunderstood. The U.S. military will bluff the Chinese or conduct an armed standoff, but if they do not adhere to the armed standoff, I was saying that we would get involved in a direct war with the Chinese. I wasn't saying that we.
Oh, that's not a bluff, man. That's a threat.
Well, I mean, the wordage was okay, but I was saying in the conversation there that we would conduct an armed standoff, and then if they just completely brushed aside the armed standoff and went to attacking Taiwan, we were going to directly intervene and support them, because in the past we have, and then I also laid out all of the historical reasons as to why that would be an incredibly important thing, also in line with our foreign policy today. So largely it seems as though some people are believing we conduct a bluff, but then a lot of people are also rebutting my opinion, saying that we wouldn't conduct a armed standoff or a bluff, whatever you want to call it, and we would do nothing, and then the war would begin, and then we would just start shooting at the Chinese. I think that generally, I would have to disagree with that a little bit on a lot of people's conclusions. Maybe it's just limited by the poll answer, but I think that we would always conduct an armed standoff like we have historically, and then the Chinese would have to be given the option of facing down the U.S. military protecting the Republic of China, as well as the Republic of China's armed forces, and then trying to conduct an attack against those combined defensive forces, the U.S. and the Taiwanese combined together. So with that in mind, I would say that we would conduct an armed standoff, but then we would move immediately on, if the Chinese disregarded the armed standoff and started a war with Taiwan, to getting directly involved in the conflict and directly engaging People's Liberation Army forces on the sea, air, and ground. So that would largely be my belief.
So even if that meant, like, for example, the mutual destruction of the Chinese economy and the U.S. economy, because you do agree that that would basically implode the U.S. economy if we did that.
It would cause significant damage, but it wouldn't really implode. And I really need to get that really quickly. Partners. It would cause an economic depression, but the U.S. economy would not explode like we're seeing Russia's right now, to where it's quite literally people can't afford to eat. A lot of consumer goods would probably disappear, but there are still a decent amount of them that are out there that are not, of Chinese. I mean, China is our number 3 export partner at this point, and when I say number 3, it's hardly even number 3. I mean, hell, Mexico does twice the trade these days in this year than the Chinese do with us. Mexico provides more consumer goods at this point in the U.S. economy than the Chinese does by a factor of 2. The Canadians are at the same level. In fact, Canada is now our biggest trading partner, and the Chinese...
Isn't that exports, though? Am I reading this correctly? I think that says exports from the U.S. to Canada, though. I think we're supposed to be looking at imports.
Let's see here. Let me see here. Let me check really quickly.
I think it might be flipped around with the numbers here on this chart.
Well, let me make sure. Let me go to another chart then, just to get the imports to the United States. So let's see. Who's the U.S. biggest trading partners? No. That is the top five purchasers of U.S. good. Oh, wait a minute. That is a U.S. exports. Let me flip it around and get the imports. So imports. So let's see here. Who are the U.S. import
And someone
partners?
said that's not counting drugs. Well, they don't count the illegal goods in the thing. They leave that out. That doesn't make the list.
So let's see here. As of 2022, and let me see if I can get, let's see. So in 2024, Mexico is our largest trading partner. The Chinese are number 2. Canada is right behind them at number 3, just shy around 20 billion from what I'm reading according to US News. So with that in mind, it does appear that the Chinese are not as important of a consumer partner. I mean, hell, even in just the past 2 years, the Chinese have dropped from being the number 1 importer to the United States to number 2 by a significant margin. And by the next year, I would assume that they're probably going to be dropping below the Canadians, because right now the Chinese are conducting a seismic shift economically, which is why they're having a major issue with unemployment. They're doing this too quickly. They're moving from being an industrial-based economy to a services-based economy, a lot like the United States. That was laid out in the 19th People's the 5th plenum of the 19th People's Congress in 2020, that Xi Jinping stated that he wanted the Chinese, the People's Republic of China, to become a prosperous socialist society, and use the United States example of a services-based economy as that model to follow by 2049. And they planned on reaching that kind of an economic realization by the mid part of this century. So with that in mind, that's why they're starting to drop off in significance as a trading partner so rapidly, is because they're moving away from the industrial powerhouse they have been for the past 25 to 30 years, and they're starting to move into a services-based economy that's more higher end, like the United States is, as they move on into the future. So with that in mind...
Now, one thing that is a little deceptive, though, about that, I know it says Mexico is our number 1 trading partner for importing goods from Mexico to the United States. But the catch with that is, though, China has begun shipping goods to Mexico, and then from Mexico will then sell the Chinese goods that they got from over there. They'll then import it into the United States, and it gets counted as Mexican trade. But actually, it's not. It's actually goods from China that's being counted in the Mexican trade with the United States.
Why would they do that when they could just ship it directly into the United States, considering we have practically no tariff with them?
Because they get to bypass tariffs that way. It's a bit of a loophole.
Are you sure? Because I'm pretty certain that the tariffs were reduced again to practically nothing at this point in between the United States and China.
Let's see here. Let's see here. Give me a second. I'm trying to do on-the-spot evidence gathering here, but that is the case. So let me go and try to get some evidence on the spot to try to back this up. So let's see here. Let's see. So the Sobel, let's see. I won't name the company that's putting this out, but it's a shipping company here. They're saying here that that apparently it's reflected in the increase in imports from China to Mexico, and it's believed that China and its sourcing partners may be bypassing tariffs by bringing goods into Mexico before sending them across the border into the U.S., which essentially makes the goods Mexican imports and allows them to avoid tariffs. And it's very difficult for the U.S. to prove this or enforce it, which is why it's such an effective loophole.
But even they aren't really sure. They're saying it may be Chinese, and also from what I understand, I believe the standard is if you're producing anything for export out of China, much like any other country in the world, they label it as made in China. So if it was crossing the Mexican border, it would still say that it was a Chinese-made good. It's just being shipped in from Mexico and not directly into a U.S. port, if I'm not mistaken.
No, well, that would be assuming that they're being honest here. But of course, there is some things that are dishonest that happen in global trade and things like this. So while they're supposed to label it from China, even though it would be shipped from Mexico into the United States, it actually ends up getting relabeled. That's the theory, at least.
Interesting. Interesting theory, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to work off of that, because usually we want hardcore facts and information. And, you know, that isn't anything that you can look at statistically or anything like that. That's more so of like a running theory. I bet it's happening, but it couldn't be on a major level of hundreds of billions of dollars, because it wouldn't be something where you just went, oh, well, you know, like, I guess that just is something happening. I mean, there would have to be some sort of statistics or facts to back that up in Mexico, that they're getting an insane amount of imports now from the Chinese into Mexican ports, and then we would have to go into looking at Mexican port activity. We would also have to be going into their trade relationship with the Chinese and see if there's a massive boost, because if not, according to Mexican authorities, then that probably might not be happening. So do we have any information to look into that avenue?
It's really hard to get that info because, once again, it relies on the fact that maybe some shipping companies in Mexico are relabeling goods that are Chinese as Mexican goods and trying to take responsibility for them, so that way they can, of course, get across the U.S. border without paying the tariffs that have been slapped on China. So there wouldn't be any tracking on that. It would simply be anecdotal, and there wouldn't be any data.
Well, I'm not really saying that though. Like, it doesn't matter about the Mexican distributors. It matters about Mexican port authorities saying that there is a massive influx of Chinese shipments into Mexico because at the time the port authority looks at the goods that are on board these vessels entering
Oh, okay.
Mexican waters, they would still have to be Chinese at that point.
Well, I got you. I got your point now. So let's see here. So the question is basically, how much goods is China shipping to Mexico? We obviously don't know if they're relabeling it, who's relabeling it, and what quantity they'd be sending to the United States. But let's see. So that's the question. So unfortunately, you might be able to find it quicker than me. Chinese shipments to Mexico with trade.
So, according to what I'm seeing right here, these are the 2022 figures, by the way. I would assume that this is probably representative of the current situation, give or take a margin of error here, probably of 10 billion. But the Chinese imports to Mexico are very, very small. The United States imports around $300 billion worth of goods into Mexico in 2022 versus China's 90 billion. So I do not believe that number, considering that the Mexicans are probably conducting fairly significant trade themselves with the Chinese, could reflect that those goods are being relabeled in some massive margin and then being imported to the United States. I would take an assumption out of that number. It might be 15 to 20 billion dollars of those goods are being relabeled by the Mexicans as Mexican-made goods, although they're from China, and then sent across the border. But I do not believe that is representing the lion's share of the massive boost of trade that Mexico's had with the United States versus the fall of the Chinese. I think that would be more so of a marginal impact.
Do we have like a chart showing the trade between the United States and Mexico over the last like 10 years? Can we see like what the growth chart looks like? Is there a sudden spike in it where it just suddenly starts taking off exponentially?
Let's see here. Let's take a look. So U.S. goods exports to Mexico in 2022 were 324 billion, up 17% from 2021 and up 50% from 2012. So let's see. This is the United States Trade Representative of the Office of the President. So let's take a look. Okay, this is no graph. Let me go back. I hope y'all are enjoying this because this is kind of like the deep analysis and reading that we do off screen and kind of like the questions we ask on things that we kind of have fleshed out and talk about on air already. So let me see. So let's move to the Council of Foreign Relations and let's see if they have. Okay, this is not a graph. This is just a kind of like a general summary of U.S.-Mexican relations. So what about the census? That doesn't tell us a damn thing either. Is there anyone who's just put together a graph on this? So
let's see. So I found here from Statista. It says chart, U.S. trade with Mexico surges to #1 position. So let me get this for you. And it shows exactly what I thought it was going to show. So it might actually prove my point somewhat here. Let me copy this and send it over. There you go. You found it. So it's the red line is the one you're supposed to be looking at here. And it looks like somewhere around 2020 or so, it looks like there was a massive spike in trade from Mexico out of the blue, and it suddenly jumped up to current levels that we're seeing right now, which is a massive jump. It used to be somewhat slow growth, but it was just exponential around 2020, which might indicate that there is something going on between China and Mexico, shipping goods from China into Mexico and then over the U.S. border.
But how would we explain the jump of Canadian trade? Because no one's saying that Canadian authorities are shady, and also like the combined growth. Let's look at this. Let's see where we can see. So this looks like it was $520 billion collectively in between China and Canada. Well, not China, Canada and Mexico each by 2020 in trade. And it also looks like that drop maybe from the Wuhan whirlybird as well. It looks like everyone took a dip that year. But over the next 2 years, both Canada and Mexico skyrocketed in importations to the United States, while China grew a little bit in 2021, a little bit in 2022, and then started to drop off significantly by 2023. But this graph is showing that really massive trades are being done in between Mexico and Canada combined with the United States, and at the same time, China's trade with the United States was also growing for 2 years as well, and then dropped off. And with that in mind, there's no way that really could be reflected in the Mexican trades because they were importing the same amount of goods as Mexico was in 2021. And it didn't show any real significant change where it looked like Chinese trade was dropping while Mexico was rising. For 2 years, Chinese and Mexican trade with the United States was rising, and now in 2023, it's starting to drop off.
Well, here's some more information. So apparently around 2020, obviously there was the Wuhan whirlybird around that time. That was one thing going on that could affect trade, but that would not explain why trade suddenly exploded exponentially like this. That would not explain that away. So it looks like the new United States-Mexico-Canada agreement, the USMCA, entered into force on July the 1st, 2020, about the exact same time where it looks like the trade jumped up. So that would be another possible explanation for why it did jump up. But once again, that does not disprove the theory that China is shipping goods into Mexico and then trying to bypass tariffs. In fact, that might add credibility to it because without getting too deep into the USMCA, that basically makes China not so great of a trading partner with that new legislation right there. And that would incentivize China to try to get around those tariffs by shipping stuff into Mexico or another country to bypass the tariffs.
But also another thing that you may not be considering is that because of the new trade deal that we have, the USMCA, it may be incentivizing American businesses to move their manufacturing from China, which the Chinese are perfectly fine with as they're trying to transition into a services-based economy, and they're now moving it into Mexico because it's cheaper to produce the goods in Mexico and then import them to the United States than it is now for them to manufacture them in China and then transport them into the United States, which may also be something that's factored in here as well.
Maybe so. Also, Robert Martin brought up a good question. He said you should look into how many Chinese factories are in Mexico. Do we have a number on that, by the way? Is that something we just search for and find out real quick? Like Chinese factories in Mexico?
Let's see if I can find it. Chinese factories in Mexico. Let's see if we can find it. Let's see here. Setting up. Let's see what factories. So let's see. Chinese heavy manufacturer Lingong Manufacturing Group, LGMG, invested $5 billion in Nuevo Leon in October 2023. They'll be building things like roadwork equipment and excavators, but they will also be leasing out factory floor space to various Chinese multinationals, including those in the auto space. But the thing is with that, though, is that we do not allow vehicles such as that, Chinese-made excavators, I believe, into the United States. I don't believe those are import allowed. I believe all those are produced in the United States to U.S. standards and not by LGMG.
Maybe so. Let's see here. Here's an article from the BBC. I know some people are going to say, oh, like the BBC, I don't believe them. But it looks like they backed this up with evidence. This came out on April 21st of this year. It said how Chinese firms are using Mexico as a backdoor to the USA. And it shows here a bunch of furniture that was typically made in China being made by the Chinese manufacturers inside of Mexico. So technically, there's no funny business with that whatsoever. It's actually goods being made in Mexico, but are funded by the Chinese companies, making it in Mexico and then shipping it across the border with the very low tariffs. And that would be the way that China would get around that, is by simply setting up these manufacturing firms inside of Mexico and then shipping them across the border. So let's see here. I was trying to see what the other details were about the numbers here. Let's see here. It said, I think it's called nearshoring. That's the term for that, by the way. Let's see here. It looks like Mexico's total exports had risen 5.8%. A year. That's not pertinent, actually. Let's move on here.
Hang on. Well, this is, what's crazy is that I just read the article as well. This literally sounds like what American companies did to sell into the United States back in the early 2000s. They all moved to China because of how the tariffs and certain kinds of regulations taxes and regulations were working here in America. They were trying to circumvent that. Now Chinese companies are doing that, and they're moving from China into Mexico, so that way they can then produce their goods and make good margins on them by importing them into the United States. So that honestly just sounds kind of like what America's doing, because if we wanted to make that argument that that's just a Chinese company selling back into America, we can make the argument that China isn't a major economic trading partner at all. It's the American companies in China, manufacturing in China, that are the major trading partners of the United States.
Well, that would somewhat be comparable, because the Chinese companies are not moving here to the U.S. to avoid the tariffs. They're moving to a neighboring country to avoid the tariffs. So what you're saying was the U.S. companies moved to China to avoid the tariffs, but that's a little bit different because that's directly in the country that they're trading with. So it's a bit different.
I believe you may have misheard, or I may have misspoke. I was saying the taxes and regulations inside the United States that were making them economically uncompetitive.
Okay.
So with that in mind, they moved from the United States to China because it was cheaper to manufacture and then transport it from China back into the United States. And now, because of the United States tariffs, Chinese companies are moving from China into Mexico so that way they can produce their goods and be economically competitive in the United States and then import them into Mexico. So, making the argument that those are just Chinese companies, we could say that China is not an economically successful country at all. It's all of the American companies that went over there because they were trying to avoid the taxes and certain kinds of regulations that the U.S. government was instilling on them while they were inside of the United States.
All right. And also, folks, we're going to take a brief interruption here. We're going to set up a boxing match here in Enforcer HQ 2.0. We're going to put the gloves on and we're going to go at it. Not really. I'm just joking. But honestly, though, like I think the audience is getting a little bit frustrated with the conversation I'm seeing in the chat. So I'm not going to go any further with it. I could debate this one for actually quite some time. I was pulling up some more information.
Fun with it.
I was having fun with it as well. I think some people think we're fighting, but no, this is not actually fighting. Y'all should see the real fighting. But Enforcer, I think we might need to get to the Ukraine news, otherwise we might run over time.
Yeah, I think we might actually have to. But this was an incredibly fun conversation. We'll probably try and maybe continue this sometime off air. But I'm not going to lie, Matthew. I think I'm actually coming down with an illness because I'm feeling burning hot right now, and I've kind of got this like wheezing thing going on when I've got the mic muted. But anyways, moving on from that and into the remainder of the news that we have tonight. Moving on into Moscow, we got to hear that Assad's wife is going to be divorcing him to try and return back to the United Kingdom. Asma al-Assad, the wife of former Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, has reportedly asked for a divorce in a bid to seek a return to the UK, as she is a British citizen. Boo-hoo-hoo. Poor fella, he's losing everything. First he lost his country, now he's losing his woman. A sad time for Bashar al-Assad, to be sure. But moving on from that and into our next bit of news inside of Kyiv, we did get to hear that there was a significant night in the air defense reports as Ukraine was able to down another 52 PLA drones that were flying into the airspace of Ukraine overnight. Meanwhile, inside the Kursk Oblast, we also got to hear near Bolshoi Soldatskoye of a failed assault that the 36th Marines was able to repel by the Russians. And we can see the Russians advancing right here.
Also, I got a juicy poll here coming up, by the way. We only skimmed over this news, but we got to have a good poll on this one. So there you go.
We've got to have one because now Assad is quite literally, unequivocally, as the folks on the street call it, holeless. But we were able to see the Russian APCs getting obliterated right here by the 36 Marines anti-tank fire, knocking out the APCs and destroying them. And that's the end of that clip, but still very nice to see. Moving on from that and into our next clip inside of the Kursk area, we were also able to see a tow Humvee. Look at that, with the Kursk markings on the Humvee. How cool. We love tow Humvees, and tow Humvees love us. Moving on from that and into the location unknowns, we also got to see another picture from the 38th Marines of a Martyr 1A3 in operation with the brigade. We were able to see the Ukrainians having a fun time laughing and joking as they were sitting around, and we also got to see one of those neat Swedish amphibious transports as well, right there. Moving on from that and out of the area, it's now time for us to move on into our next bit, where we also get to see the 37th Separate Marine Brigade in training. What a beautiful AK. That thing is maintained to the max, and this guy's also firing this thing on automatic. Pretty cool. We also get to see this fella here inspecting the troops in training. We also get to see some sort of an APC this guy is sitting in. We also get to see a heavy machine gun, an NSV. Meanwhile, moving on from that and into our next bit, we also get to see a Ukrainian repair bay right here. Look at this. Look at that. How impressive. How cool. What just a neat thing right here. How neat.
Look at that engine, man. That's a clean engine right there. Like the interiors of the cylinders, like it should be, are very clean. I like that.
Man, it really is, man. They clean those things to a T. And we also got to see the Russian casualty report as well. And ole mole.
Holy moly, no Bobcast today. That's unfortunate. This is the last stream before Christmas. They did not deliver for Christmas. Maybe on the 25th they'll have something extra. But Enforcer, tell us more.
And man, the losses were significant. According to Miss Disa, Keeper of the record, sorry there if you heard me breathe right there. I'm trying to deal with this whole cough thing. I'm about to start coughing every word I say. But 1,820 Russian soldiers and North Koreans were wounded and killed, which is the 5th highest daily troop loss of the entire war. The 7-day average has risen to 1,666. And the week total is 11,660. 3 AA systems is the highest since October 31st of 2024, and other categories are maintaining recent levels. But the losses have been good. 1,820 Russian soldiers have been wounded and killed over the past 24 hours, along with 29 APCs, 81 supply trucks, 15 main battle tanks, 32 artillery pieces, 50 drones, and 3 anti-aircraft systems. All in all, it was a pretty good day, and it appears that the losses are still pretty good. Moving on from that and into the area around Vovchansk, we also got to see the Russians using assault scooters. Scoot. The Russians heard about that drive-by scooting in Moscow and decided that they'd get on the action as well.
That's so dumb. Like, literally, is that Bing Shilling scooters, like, from Alibaba?
I think it is. You better lock up your doors today. You're gonna bust your knee on the scooter. Going crying when I come riding with me and my 40 volts. Bum, 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 bum.
That's a 40 volts. It's like, what happened to the dirt bikes? That was still a little bit, like, goofy to ride in a battle on a dirt bike, but that's still better than the scooter.
Man, these guys are riding in on razors. like, no joke.
A razor, блядь, they're going to cut them.
Oh, and they all just got wiped out. Oh, and this guy, he's just walking out from under a railway bridge, as one does, as one naturally does.
Bro just woke up from a 1,000-year slumber.
Man, hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again. Because the vision softly creeping. Man, the high notes are always terrible. You get your music from Enforcer, your ears will be bleeding. But anyways, this guy's about to get slammed. Kablam. Whoa! And that was an impressive hit right there. Absolutely amazing. And moving on from that and down to the Kupiansk area, we were also able to see more Russians getting hit. Hit like some nice old amazing hits. Look at this. Look at this. The 92nd Brigade was hitting them.
Bing! That's a war rebel.
Chilling. Oh, 333. That must be Hal Rose right there, but it shows anonymous. Legendary, though. Legendary.
Hal Rose coming in strong. Look at that. He didn't have to do it like that.
Man, Hal Rose is a legend. Quite truly. You're a great one. Mr. Rose, you support the fundraiser, bum, bum. But thank you once again. And we can also see them knocking out more Russian tanks as well. Anyone wanting to cook? Anyone can cook, and Russians cook especially well.
But only the fearless can cook great.
Man, only people who have rats in their hair yanking on their, only people who have rats in their head yanking on their hair can cook well. That was the story of Ratatouille. But moving on from that...
Every single New Yorker might be able to cook good now, because they got rats running around everywhere. They just need to say, here, up on the hat, hat.
Nah, dude, the rats in New York are so big, they'd be going up to Remy and going, hey, get out of the way, this is my kitchen. And then he'd just go running out, and then it'd start cooking on its own, no person included.
Man,
actually,
I'm telling you what,
man, knowing how that would go, man, some manager of a restaurant in New York would be like, hey, look, it's absolutely incredible. I don't have to pay the rent. I don't have to pay a worker. Food's still cooked. It's even better than what they're doing in Paris or whatever the hell. Like it'd probably be something like that. Man, the food inspector.
Well, the only thing that they did in Ratatouille to make sure the restaurant was successful is they tied up the health inspector and abducted him and kidnapped him and brought him off to an unknown location. I'm like, that's a little bit illegal, but they kept the restaurant running, I guess.
Man, well, it's also, by the way, this is a really cool clip, y'all, because a ground drone actually saved a Baba Yaga from the front. And any second now, you see it putting out the forklift to pick up the Baba Yaga. Man, knowing how that would work, though, the food inspector would come in and go, hey, what the hell is this giant rat doing over here? And then the rat would come up, hey, man, don't bring this up, and like bring out like a crumpled 50, and the food inspector would grab it. I'll let it slide this time.
That's
Something
what I
like
was about
that.
to say, man. The Ratatouille people had it all wrong. All you had to do was slip them a 50. You didn't have to kidnap them.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like slide the man a 50, and he'll say, "Listen, I look it over this time, but next time you better be on your game." And then he'll just walk out. Like, that's how it works. You're gonna have a moldy ice cream machine. You just gotta have a crumpled up 50. Moving on from that and down in the Bachman, we also got to see a Rubish with an in-law, a Rubish soldier that is with an in-law. Look at that guy. He is happy to have it, and everyone's happy for him to have one as well. Look at that guy. Smiles for miles. The motto of BNSF, the Burlington Northern and Santa Fe. But we also got to see
The only man happy to see the in-laws right there on the Ukrainian battlefield.
Hello. That's what he looks like too. But we can see the Bradley chomping up some Russians. I thank you, Navy Man, for the kind words. The Navy Man said, LSA is the best, 100% fact. And I thank you for saying that's 100% fact. I hope that everyone did enjoy our pretty long segment. I'm not even going to lie, it was a really long one, on Chinese-American relations, because we never really get to get into debates on air, and some people may not like to hear debates. We actually find them really fun, because we get to kind of like talk about differing opinions and what we believe about it. And sometimes we end up with inconclusive results, and we just have to figure out who was right or wrong in years' time, because things like that, it takes like decades to really see how things would turn out. But still, pretty cool. And thank you.
They need to tie up that loophole, though. Like, if China is shipping stuff like I think they are, and like it suggests in the data, and they're shipping stuff like in huge quantity to Mexico to get around the tariffs, or either manufacturing the Chinese goods in Mexico to get around the tariffs, that should probably be fixed up, because that's definitely not good to let them get around it like that.
I would agree. Also, by the way, we got to see this unarmored assault in the Pokrovsk area, and they got blasted. I'm just wondering, Matthew, because I've never really listened to anyone else give analysis and have a debate like that on air, really, to be honest, at all. Like, I wonder how our sounds compared to others, because I've never heard a debate like that on the show before.
I don't know, but like, I think what gets me is I think a lot of people think that's a fight. Like, to us, that's not a fight. Like, we have to say this every time we debate something because people think we're fighting. That was not a fight whatsoever. So I see some people like jump in the middle of it and be like, "That dude over there is an idiot. He doesn't know what he's talking about." It's like, dude, it's like, I saw people saying that about both of us. It said, one person said you were an idiot for saying what you're saying. Somebody said I was an idiot, didn't know what I was talking about. It's like, I don't even know, man. Like, at this point, like, it seems like some of these people that get irate like that would come in and say, no, like, you're incorrect because of X, Y, Z reason, and prove you wrong that way, instead of just coming in like, freaking like throwing hands and stuff like that. It's like, I don't even understand it.
Yeah, because like you and me will sit there and you'll be like, I think you may be mistaken because you may not be considering this. And I'll be like, am I? Let's look into it. And we'll both do that back and forth the same way, because I'll be like, I think you're not considering this. Do we have any numbers on that to see about that? And then we do it like that. And then some people will come in and be like, "You idiot, you bastard." And it's like, wait a minute. It's like, hold on, don't beat us. What are you doing with that hammer? Stop, we're just talking. Like, we can talk and disagree without it being a fight. I know a lot of people are used to that these days, where folks disagree and it is a fight, but this is just an old-fashioned debate. Like, we're just talking out our opinions and trying to get some facts and information in the middle of the discussion to be able to back something up or not. Neither of us are trying to cut the other one down and like eat him for lunch, or anything. We're trying to actually get down to the bottom of it.
Now, if we were having a debate, like any other channel might have a debate, I'm going to have to pick on certain people here. A lot of the like Ukraine war channels, they don't really debate stuff when they bring people on for a debate properly. They just jump right into, if they hear something that they disagree with, like, for example, someone trying to defend Russia, which obviously we disagree with a whole bunch, they just jump into directly like, F you, and that's like just like the nonstop like cursing, crazy stuff, things like that. It's like, don't bring people on, even if they have a pro-Russian perspective, don't bring them on your show if you're not willing to discuss it, because otherwise it's just like basically like what mainstream media does. They bring on people to bash them on air, knowing that they don't agree with their point, and they're not actually having discussions. They're just getting clicks and views.
Man, I'm not gonna lie, man. The way people do it on other shows, it's almost like a damn Julius Caesaring. You know what I mean? Like it's like they'll bring out someone and everyone will just stab them. It's like don't do that. It's like that's not a debate. Like and so many people have gotten used to it. Like people like I'll just say their name. People like Ben Shapiro are like just masters of just beating the shit out of people without actually having a debate. Like they'll be like, well, what do you think about this? You're wrong. Go jump off a bridge. Thanks. It's like that is no way to debate someone. It's like that is ridiculous. But also, look at this old fella here in Tourette's. He's just hanging out in the middle of a war zone. By the way, I forgot to tell you all of that about this clip. When you see them replaying it again and showing it.
Куда идешь? Пьяный? Выпивший? Пидоров видел где-то русских?
Не, подожди.
Русские зашли сюда уже в город. Видел, нет?
Кроме тебя никого не видел.
Я не русский.
We see them conversating with the old fella.
Кроме тебя никого не видел.
Хорошо, куда идешь?
У меня дом 14. Я домой до тебя зайду.
Все, иди домой.
I see some people having different opinions on Ben Shapiro since I brought up his name. Me personally, now I will say this, growing up as a kid and not really knowing that much, the rapid fire cutting someone down as quick as you can, pretty much massacring them verbally, seemed like it was really good when I was young. But as I started to grow up, I started to realize that that is really no way to debate someone. That's more so just cutting them down because of a differing opinion and really not trying to logically speak it out, because you don't have to be at hostile odds verbally with someone that you're disagreeing with. You know, like that's kind of the thing. Like, you know, Matthew and me could easily get to cutting each other down like that in a debate at all. You know, be like, you're stupid because you didn't think about the import numbers, Mexico, and so you're stupid and give up and lose all hope. It's like you could do that, and it's like that wouldn't be right. That's just rude and chomping someone else down. That may have a good point if you allow them to flesh it out a little bit more, because you know, like both sides are trying to feel their way through their points. You know, like they're pretty good points, might not have all the information available, and so you want to give folks time to actually try and formulate the thought well, and then listen to it, and then if you disagree with it, counter it or agree with it.
Well, Shapiro just knows how to steer people into giving stupid answers because he rapid fires all of his questions and statements so fast. It's hard for the other side to really come up with what they're trying to say because he literally rapid fires it, talking at like 3,000 words a minute. And he also gets somewhat like semi-hostile even when he's starting the conversation, which also puts the other person off a little bit. And he just like has these people get so flustered, they end up saying something really stupid, and then it's really easy to eviscerate them after that. Once they say something stupid, you can like kill their credibility. It's over with. Like the discussion at that point is just falling apart completely.
Yeah, it's a rough one. Also, by the way, we have this very interesting clip right here for all of y'all of a Ukrainian Bodana in action in the Donetsk front. It's a bit of a lengthy clip, but once again, a huge shout out to United 24 for coming out with some really interesting documentaries throughout the course of the war. And so without further ado, here's the clip.
For these guys, it's kind of Christmas in advance, so they can work with the Bordana in this direction. And well, it's going to be obviously a different, very different kind of Christmas for the Russians.
Hello everyone, we're on our way to meet the guys from the 45th Artillery Brigade in Donetsk Oblast. They agreed to show us the Ukrainian-made Bordana. So it's made here and it's financed by Denmark. Why it's important? Because now Ukraine might face a shortage of Western weapon and it desperately needs to produce its own weapon. So let's see what can Ukraine do by itself.
It's the muddy season. Everything is slippery, a challenge for soldiers fighting on the front line. Cars quickly get stuck and running in the mud is tough. Before checking the Bordana in action, Winter, the unit's commander, takes us to tour the shell stash. The Bordana is Ukraine's first locally made howitzer, able to launch NATO standard 155mm shells.
You can't smoke there, you can smoke here. A dummy won't detonate from a cigarette. Here we have M107 and cluster munitions. We often use cluster munitions, but also mines. It depends on the situation, when we hit equipment or positions. Near Toretsk, there was a Russian infantry in a house. So first we used small arms, then we hit them with a landmine.
Ukraine's use of cluster munitions raised eyebrows in the West. For winter, it's fair play.
In 2022, when we didn't have any cluster munitions at all, the enemy used shrapnel and phosphorus against us. They don't pull punches, and we need to defend ourselves somehow.
The team has to use the ones they have sparingly and accurately, as Western help threatens to dwindle over winter. Each shell counts when calculating the crew's chance of survival to see victory. So some of the guys from the 45th basically came here to unload some new ammo. So for these guys, it's kind of Christmas in advance, so they can work with the Bortana in this direction. And well, it's going to be obviously a different, very different kind of Christmas for the Russians.
When I was in the Toretsk direction, we fired up to 70 shells daily. We arrived here 4 days ago. We launched 10 to 12 shells per day in general, depending on the tasks.
I know it looks a little weird because those are supposed to have explosives. So no worries, these are empty, so we can safely stand in front of it while they actually throw that into the truck.
See, even he thinks it looks a little dangerous. He also thinks it does as well.
And when you're getting called out by your own reporters.
He's like, you see, it looks like it'd be an OSHA violation, but by technical loophole, it isn't. It's like, it still looks like one, though. It's like, it still looks dangerous. And also, thank you for throwing in that quote, Walter Lakota. I saw it, and that was a very, very good one. And so with that, we're back onto the clip.
Small break for a hearty meal. Those homemade meals make a difference in the morale of those men, exhausted by years of war.
We're having pasta!
Man, someone coughed like I'm about to cough back there, honestly.
We're working 24/7.
How's the mood overall?
How's the mood in general? Combative. Great.
The break is short. The commander received the coordinates of a target spotted by drones. It's time to put the Bortana at work.
Man, those things are just so cool.
Moving the howitzer from its dugout to the shooting spot takes only a few seconds. No need to move it out of the position, especially with this mud. The cannon has a 70-degree rise and a 40-kilometer firing range. The Russians are roughly 10 kilometers from the artillery position. Based on the French Caesar and the Swedish Archer howitzers, the Bortana's accuracy makes it a deadly threat to the receiving end. A cable hangs at the end of the howitzer. They pull it to launch the shell. Better clear the back of the cannon when the blast hits. The howitzer has two massive bulldozer-like claws behind it to stop the vehicle from moving with the recoil.
FPV drones are reportedly reaching our first battery, sometimes overshooting by 10 kilometers, though EW systems are intercepting them. We haven't seen any here yet, but whenever the crew starts working, the guys raise the curtain and deploy the decoy. Meanwhile, I run the generator. Whether it's a Shahed, Lancet, or whatever, at least it won't hit the crew or the gun.
Obviously this is war, and well, we don't necessarily have the time to bring the Bortana to the mechanics, and because we did it on the battlefield. So, you know, Ukrainian fixing, some wood and big nails. But yeah, I guess it works.
After weighing if they should destroy it or not to avoid its capture by the Russians, Ukraine's military managed to save the first Bortana howitzer prototype from the front back in 2022. Currently, the country produces 20 of these howitzers per month, and they adapt them to the needs of the battlefield.
It all depends on what the infantry needs and our assigned tasks. We can work in the rear and the front, but the fire gets closer at the front. And here, the barrel suffers less.
Winter used to sell car parts when the war started, and he couldn't stand idle, despite his wife's disapproval.
I told my wife I was going to wash the car, but in fact, I registered at an enlistment office.
Liar! He said, all right, honey, I'm going to go get some milk. And then he went and joined the war. It's like, man, that's a little different.
She said, is he still out there washing the car? It's been like freaking like a year now.
Dude, somewhere out there, his wife is sitting there looking out a window and said, he went away a year and a half ago to wash the car, and he's just never come home. It's like, that's what happened.
Will cover the ground, making it even harder to fight and dig trenches, let alone move the Bordana. It's gonna be another harsh winter for these soldiers, stuck in an endless war.
After 3 years, believing that it will end overnight is an illusion that has long gone. We'll wait and see, and then tell you how the winter went.
And that's the end of the clip right there from United 24, a very interesting clip showing us the operations of the Bordana. And without further ado, it's now time for us to make it on into Kyiv to cover the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky. And he didn't put one out. So let me go to his YouTube and let me see if I can find it. Holy moly! And so let me go see. President of Ukraine. Office of the President of Ukraine. He made some sort of a statement 17 hours ago and has gotten 6,000 views. That's what we get in about 5 minutes. But with that, here's the speech. Speech! Okay, so here we go. Let me go get the English subtitles. 1 second, everyone. Corsican? They have Corsican in the subtitles? Whack! That's actually pretty cool. I never even saw that before. But anyways, here you go. Without further ado, here is the speech from me. And so, here, take it.
Панове українські дипломати, усі працівники і працівниці дипломатичної служби нашої держави. Вітаю вас з професійним днем. Вдячний вам за роботу заради інтересів України, інтересів кожного і кожної в нашій державі, наших людей. Ми проходимо вже третій рік повномасштабної війни, зберігаючи незалежність України, свій суверенітет, здатність нашої держави досягти і досягати необхідних результатів. За рік, що минає, Україна змогла стати сильніше, змогла стати ближче до мети, яка об'єднує весь наш народ. Нам потрібно здолати окупанта, перемогти це зло. Нам потрібен справедливий мир, і кожен з вас повинні працювати саме заради цього. Бути послом України, бути українським дипломатом – це бути людиною, яка може відповісти абсолютно конкретно на питання, що саме було вами зроблено для наближення миру, для захисту інтересів України, українців. Наступний рік буде ключовим з точки зору саме цього завдання. Ми повинні зробити все, щоб 25-й рік став для України роком справедливого миру. Ми всі розуміємо, що в січні після зміни адміністрації Сполучених Штатів Америки відбудеться і багато змін в міжнародних справах. Наступного року в деяких ключових країнах, в Німеччині, Польщі, передусім та інших, будуть вибори. І також постійно змінюється внутрішній баланс сил та настрої в таких регіонах, як Близький Схід, регіон Затоки, Північна Африка, Сахель, Латинська Америка. Потрібне просування інтересів України у відносинах з Індією, Китаєм, іншими державами Азії, розвиток реального партнерства з Японією, більш змістовні відносини з Кореєю. У світі є сотні напрямків відносин, в яких для України потрібен реальний, конкретний, відчутний результат. І саме це ваша робота. бути в усіх потрібних кабінетах, бути у медіа, бути в спілкуванні з усіма потрібними для України людьми, бути зрозумілими так, щоб Україна мала необхідний результат. Я дякую всім тим, хто працює саме так, хто працює не просто на втому в кінці робочого дня чи на вдячність безпосереднього керівника. Не з 9 до 18 години, а на результат для України. Окремий напрямок – це, безумовно, Європейський Союз. Все, що потрібно для повноправного членства України в ЄС. На всіх рівнях в ЄС, від найвищих інституцій до громадських лідерів, голос України має звучати впевнено, конкретно і переконливо. Нам потрібен вступ в Євросоюз. Наступного року ми маємо зробити для цього максимум в процесі перемовин і розбудові відносин з партнерами в Європейському Союзі. Тому головування Польщі, а у другому півріччі Данії в ЄС мають стати історичними для України. Я розраховую на подальше наповнення змістом нашої роботи з НАТО. Усі ми розуміємо, що запрошення України в НАТО та членство в Альянсі можуть бути рішеннями виключно політичними. Завжди потрібна сміливість лідерів, щоб ухвалити і ухвалювати те чи інше рішення. Але сміливість лідерів у таких питаннях, як зміна геополітичного погляду на ту чи іншу країну, або як визнання лідерами глобальних помилок попередніх часів в його країні, завжди базуються на вимогах суспільної думки. Коли суспільство робить крок вперед, лідеру держави, навіть представникам старої школи, складно залишатись на попередніх позиціях. Тому дуже важливо, щоб робота щодо НАТО для України не була тільки кабінетною. Дипломати у відносинах з відповідними країнами та усіх інших країнах, які можуть допомогти з важливими рішеннями, повинні в щоденному режимі працювати на відповідну думку, відповідну суспільну думку. І тими засобами, які працюють, а не просто тими, які зручні. Партнери мають знати, що може дати Україна Альянсу, чому це буде краще для всіх і як це стабілізує глобальні відносини. Альянс для України – це досяжно, але досяжно тільки тоді, коли за це рішення б'ємось на всіх рівнях, на всіх потрібних. За роки війни ми налагодили системну роботу з багатьма партнерами щодо зброї для наших хлопців і дівчат на передовій. На рівні Офісу, на рівні Міністерства оборони, на рівні Міністерства закордонних справ, на рівні військового командування, на рівні посольств. Я хочу подякувати всім, хто був залучений і хто зараз залучений. Така ж системна робота має бути налагоджена щодо всіх аспектів справедливості миру для України. Це так само важливо, як і постачання зброї. Треба проводити нашу політику і нікому не давати щось вирішувати за спиною України. Відповідальність Росії за цю війну має бути. Санкції проти Росії мають працювати стільки, скільки потрібно нам для того, щоб тиснути на Росію. Вже є рішення щодо використання заморожених російських активів на користь України, але потрібно йти далі, шукати ті російські активи, які ще не заморожені, шукати активи всіх російських воєнних злочинців та політичних спільників Путіна. Такі кошти в Росії заробляються завдяки корупції, а отже в багатьох юрисдикціях такі кошти можуть бути заблоковані навіть не тільки через цю ганебну війну, але й через злочинний характер набуття цих коштів. Треба працювати більше, щоб російські активи працювали на наш захист, на наше відновлення. Це справедливо. Також ваше завдання – працювати якнайбільше з усіма партнерами, які вже інвестують або можуть стати інвесторами в наше внутрішнє українське виробництво зброї, в наші спільні проекти з відновлення. Потрібно працювати з усіма партнерами на рівні держав, компаній, на рівні медіа, на рівні церков. Це також дуже важливо. Академічної спільноти зі сфер мистецтва та спорту, з усіма, хто може долучитись до нашої політичної, інформаційної, культурної роботи. Всі форми дипломатії від звичної до м'якої сили, від дипломатії перших осіб і парламентської дипломатії до дипломатії сердець. Все, що може зміцнити Україну, повинно працювати заради України. Будь ласка, шукайте саме таких співробітників для української дипломатії, хто може забезпечувати реальне виконання завдань для України. Зараз ми разом з міністром закордонних справ, разом з нашою командою в офісі, ми погодили ряд нових призначень для українських дипломатів, для представництв України, для українських посольств. Рішення стосуються наших представництв в усіх регіонах світу. Кожному регіону ми даємо необхідне посилення. Призначаються зараз також суспільні громадські лідери, такі як, мабуть, ви публічно вже це розумієте і чули, такі як Наріман Джелял, пані Альона Гетманчук, Федір Шандор, Юлія Федів. Я прошу кадрових дипломатів, представників систем Міністерства закордонних справ допомагати в усьому таким людям, новим людям. І, будь ласка, посилюйте систему нашої дипломатії тими людьми і співпрацею з тими людьми, хто довів, що вміє здобувати необхідне для України, необхідне для всіх нас, для всіх українців. Я вас вітаю з вашим днем, з вашим святом. Дякую за запрошення. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Героям слава!
And with that, it is time for us to move on into the second segment of tonight's stream, where we get to talk to each and every one of you. And I have to say that it has been an absolutely incredible night, an amazing night, a real night, a long-lasting night. And I have to thank all of you once again for getting to this joyous occasion here in the questions segment. But without further ado, Matthew, what do we have?
All right, so jumping into our last question segment of the night, we have some polls to address and also some questions and top donors of the night. But first of all, our poll currently says Bashar al-Assad's wife is now divorcing him after he was overthrown. Is she wrong for that? 39% said, she ought to be locked up. 32% said no, she's right for that. 16% said no, she's dead wrong for that. And 14% said unsure. And on this episode of Wives, but honestly, for this one, to be perfectly serious, this might be a hot take. She ought to be locked up. If she tries to show up to the UK, they ought to lock her up and charge her with something. In my view, she's complicit in what was happening in Syria. She may not have known everything that was going on, but if she really found it so bad what was happening, she could have left on a vacation, per se, and headed to a foreign country and then tried to seek asylum to get away from this guy if he was that crazy and that bad, which we found out he actually was that bad. So she was staying there and enjoying all the trappings of him being a dictator in Syria and was complicit in it, really didn't say anything and didn't try to leave it, and now all of a sudden she wants to run off and have a perfectly nice life separated away from the madman with all the luxuries that come with it. She should probably not be allowed to enjoy all that and probably should face some type of consequences. But Enforcer, what say you?
Look, we all know why she was married to him, all right? She looks kind of like Angelina Jolie, not gonna lie, fairly attractive. But at the same time, she's married to a guy that looks like this. I mean, like, you know, it's very obvious at this point what in the world she was married to him for. She was married to him for the money and the power that he had, being a dictator of Syria. So now that all the power is gone and all the money is going to be drying up because there's not an endless money glitch at this point of running Syria, she's decided she's going to run for the hills at this point and divorce the guy. I would say, to be entirely honest, she was complacent every single step of the way with him, with everything that happened in Syria. She was married to the guy the entire time. They knew everything that was going on. You know, she had to have known. I mean, it's not like you sit there and you're the wife of the leader of Syria that's putting people into a camp, pretty much, and then not know anything about it. That would be ridiculous. Like, he's going to sit there and not tell her anything about any of this stuff, she was 100% behind it as well. And I would say that she should not be allowed to return back to the United Kingdom. And if she ever does, she should be tried for the crimes that she conducted alongside Assad. So that would be my opinion. But nevertheless,
For example, let's say we're comparing it to a different analogous situation, not totally analogous, but somewhat similar. Let's say Eva Braun, Hitler's gal. Would she be held responsible if she had survived everything and she had continued to go about her business after the entire war concluded and Hitler, went down the bunker and all that stuff? Would Eva have been held responsible, or would she have been allowed to walk scot-free without any consequences? I have a feeling she would have been held responsible, and I think the wife of Bashar al-Assad should be as well.
I don't know about that one. Because
Are you sure about that? Are you sure?
A lot of Nazi wives actually never faced punishment at all for what their husbands did, although they were pretty much living luxurious lives in Nazi Germany because of what they were doing. At least from what I remember.
But this is the wife, though, the top one.
I think in the modern day, in this instance, in this scenario, knowing that she was heavily involved in everything that was going on in Syria, most likely, I think there would be a special exception made for her. I think. But for a lot of those Syrian generals, I don't think their wives would be gone after or anything like that. I think they would go after her, though, because she was heavily involved in a lot of the stuff. I mean, like the drug dealing that the Syrian government did was specifically to get money for both of them. So she was involved in that. I mean, obviously she had to have been. So, she would probably be brought up on some form of crimes of major drug dealing or something in that character at least. So yeah, I would say in her instance, probably would. Also, let's see, Krankenstein said something really whack about what the Soviet army would do to Eva Braun, but that's actually probably true. But they did that a lot. But another thing that the Soviets would have done, they would have without a doubt tried Eva Braun. They no question about it. They would have definitely gotten her. The Allies, on the other hand, the actual Allies that weren't the Comintern or the Soviets, I don't think we would have gone after that badly per se. It would have been fairly light, maybe a few years in prison, but that would have been about it. But anyways, still, I think that she should be tried for her crimes. And the only reason she was married to Assad is because he was the dictator of Syria. Because, look at the guy. That's not that far. That's not that far away,
Also,
though, is it?
Also, what's up these days with dudes running around to start simping and stuff? It's like you'll have a very, very let's say a female with questionable morals per se. Let's say the wife of Bashar right here, and people will be like, "I can fix her." It's like, I don't understand why people go simping for people that were complicit in literally criminal activity like this. There's no fixing anything. She needs to be locked up.
Dude, there's a lot of people on the internet who have no shame, man, and will see her and then go, "I will drag through broken glass" or something like that. It's like,
whoa,
have some shame. I've seen that way too much, man, on any woman figure that is in the public. Way too much on the internet. It's something. It's like, come on. It's like, have some decency and some shame, to not do these things or say these things because it's ridiculous. But beyond that, she needs to be held responsible for her crimes. And also, Andy, what are you busting out laughing at?
Someone in the live chat, I don't know who this is. They said that thing hot AF.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Oh wait a minute, what about the fox?
No, what do you think they were talking about?
I thought they were talking about his wife.
Oh, damn, man, what the hell?
Well, that would seem more reasonable than talking about a fox, man.
Damn. Man, we were just talking about the people talking about I can fix her and stuff like that, and no shame, man. What you talking about?
Man, well, you just said he said that about the fox. I was like, what the hell? I was like, I thought he was talking about his wife.
Man, that fox ain't no car fox, but it needs some help.
That thing really does need help. But anyways, with that, it's time for us to get on into some questions before we round this thing on out for the night. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so jumping into actually our top donors of the night right here, we have our first one here, which is a $500 from James Hughes, the largest donation of the night, and huge shout out to James for that massive generosity to tonight's fundraiser. Also, huge shout out to Hal Rose, who threw in a $333, and thank you very much, Hal Rose, as well. We also had a $200 from Peace with War, as well as a $150 from Bex Chitwood, as well as a $100 from Activista, some guy called the Enforcer, as well as Hal Rose, Tom S., Captain Ted, Andy L., as well as a $75 from John C., and a $50 from Leora Abigail, Dad Good, Greg Carrier, Rad Doctor, Mike Smith, and Axel K. And once again, folks, huge shout out once again for Knight for helping us to hit the goal of $2,500. And we have smashed that well beyond, and we're up to $3,500, almost $3,600 now, which is tremendous to see. But once again, huge shout out to you all. And Enforcer, what say you?
And I gotta say, a massive shout out to everyone who supported the fundraiser tonight, both big and small in terms of donation size. Every single one of y'all has been able to make this fundraiser a reality and get it up to the amazing heights that it's at tonight. We would have never been able to see the Lee Spring Army succeed in these kinds of ways if it was not for each and every single one of y'all playing your part, whether you support the fundraiser or not, in making this channel what it is and continuing to support Ukraine in a myriad of ways. I also have to say really quickly, one more thing as well. I have to say that it's been truly incredible tonight to see so many people here. We had about 10,000 people on the stream at the peak. It was just shy of 10,000, and 77,000 people have watched the stream in just about 2 hours and 15 minutes exactly. That's wild to think, and I gotta say that it is just wonderful to know. It's incredible to know that everyone has been enjoying the stream tonight. And so with that, thank you once again, everyone, for supporting the fundraiser and enjoying the news. And Matthew, what do we got for some live chat questions?
All right, so with that, we're now jumping into our Morse code decoders of the stream. And tonight we had Cliff Simonson, Mark Hodges, Earl Bernew, Kevin J, Paul Schultz, David Millsaps for Royal Fluffiness, and Arabelle Garbo. They said the Morse for tonight says, from the LSA Signal Corps, Russia losing heavily on the last day. We are on air before Christmas is a gift. LLT LSA.
And ding, 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 that's the sound of money. Y'all got that dead on the nail. That was the Morse code message of the night. I gotta congratulate y'all for getting that correct, because over 1,033 days, y'all have never gotten that wrong, and it's always been right every time. And I gotta thank y'all once again for doing that, because it is truly amazing. And so with that, thank you all once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, so our first question from the live chat is going to go to Cami, who says, who is manufacturing China's drones? Who's going to be fulfilling that order?
Probably the Chinese. Probably the Chinese. Or maybe the Iranians. I would, maybe. But it's probably the Chinese or the Iranians. It's definitely not the Russians. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And we're on to the next one.
And our next one here goes to Rob McGuffin, who said, why does China need to announce they are ordering drones from themselves?
Simply for the fact it sounds cool. Really, it's more so to kind of put the world on notice that they're doing it, and also it may be to let the public know in China what the government's doing to improve their militarization abilities. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And someone said, "You're idiots to support NATO band." It's just like rest in peace, buddy. It's NATO or nothing these days, and NATO all the way.
You're an idiot to support NATO. We should be supporting BRICS, because you know BRICS is the new petrodollar. They've got that esoteric knowledge. You know, they've got the ruble and stuff. They're creating that BRICS dollar. You heard about that?
Oh my God! Hold up, y'all. Do y'all hear that? It's the sound of another giant joining the BRICS. It's the sound of Sudan joining. Oh my God, you guys were cooked. Oh my God, Sudan is as powerful as the United States. Oh my God. Have y'all ever seen like that documentary made about Sudan that the Russians made about them, saying that they were a superpower that had access to some super rare mineral and in fact were way more advanced than everyone else in the world, but they just kept it to themselves? They're joining BRICS. We're cooked, guys. Chat, we're cooked. It's over. You know what? I just heard of another superpower joining BRICS. Uganda. Oh my God. Do you know the way? And they do. Oh my God, they're joining BRICS. They know the way, and it's over. It's completely over for us. We're cooked.
They know the way, or at the bankruptcy if they join BRICS. Like, BRICS ought to be short for going bankrupt quick, because BRICS is no good. Like, BRICS is like the wannabe NATO. It'll never be NATO, and it's just like it's like great value or something like that. NATO. It's just terrible.
Man, you know something? I heard that BRICS has already found a name for their new currency, Matthew. Do you know what it's going to be called?
Shit and BRICS.
It's going to be called Shitcoin.
Oh, they better shill that pump and dump, bull run, getting crushed at the bottom. Man, you know what I mean?
Man, they're gonna sit there. Xi Jinping's gonna come out and go, "What's up, Beijing?" Hawk and scam on that thing, and then he's gonna pull the shit going.
Man, we haven't seen a nation pull a rug pull yet, but it's got to be coming.
That would be hilarious, man, if BRICS went that way. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, BRICS is such a joke. It's such a joke, and I just it makes me laugh at the people who just will glaze BRICS for no reason. They'll be like, oh, it's the next big thing, guys. It's bigger than the G7. It's like, no, it's not. Shut up. Stop coping. It's like no one's ever going to get close to being the G7. G7's unbeatable. Like, let's go look. Let's go look. The G7. All I have to do is put in G7. Boom. We're on the money. We're on the money. Look at this. It's an intergovernmental political and economic forum consisting of quite literally the biggest Western economies in the world, including the European Union, which is just kind of added as like a honorary thing. But if I was to go find the GDP figure for the entirety of the G7, let me go see if I can find that. G7 GDP. So the
holy moly,
49 trillion. So, and most of that's America, by the way. But let's go and get BRICS. Let's just say it's like the G7. GDP. Let's see here. Hang on. Let's see. The AI overview. BRICS countries have a combined total GDP of around 65 trillion. From where?
Yeah.
Out your ass? Like, where in the world is adding up Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa ever equate to 65 trillion? This is that bullshit that they put out on the internet that makes people go, oh, chat, we're cooked. It's like, if we put together the total GDP figures, the GDP of BRICS is what? Where is it? Where is it? Also, this is
basically pull the GDP of China, really, because that's probably the main bit of it, and then maybe Russia, too.
Okay, we're going to have to go through and hand add this because the propaganda on the internet is so damn insane about them that you can't really get a good number. So, China GDP, okay, it's 17.8. Okay, all right, 17.8. Okay, plus Russia. Okay, so that's 2. We'll say it's 2. So don't laugh. Don't laugh. They're trying their hardest, Matthew. They're trying their hardest. Humble beginnings. Humble beginnings. Brazil. Oh, it's also 2. So we'll do 2.2. We'll round it up. Plus 2.2. Okay, so now we need to go get India. We need to go get India. Okay, what do we got for India? 3.5. Oh, big money. Big money. Oh, so 3.5, and then finally, we need to do South Africa, which I bet you is a real big money player right here. Oh! Okay, so we're going to add 0.4. 0.4 to BRICS. So in total, in 2023, BRICS had a combined GDP of $25.9 trillion. So let's just compare that to the United States GDP. Yeah, they are not close. Literally adding all other countries, including China, into BRICS, they still come up around $2 trillion short of the US GDP. So BRICS ain't nothing. BRICS is not going to be out there with the esoteric shitcoin beating out the G7 or, for that matter, the Western sphere. Like, it doesn't even come close. It doesn't even get close to beating the G7, which includes every other country but America. They can't even get a combined GDP as big as America's. So they can sit down with all the stupid hype talk that they have going around the internet saying that they're equivalent to 65 trillion, but it's just whipping out a calculator and adding together their GDPs will show you that's nowhere near the case, and it's all BS. But anyways, with that, shut up, you idiot. What color is your Bugatti? But with that, we are on to the next one.
Also, someone said it was Eich. He said BRICS doesn't have 33 trillion in debt. Yeah, I'm sure they do. I'm sorry. But anyways, moving on here to our next one. This one goes to Peace with War, who said, is there a limit to how many Russians will die for Putin, and is his popularity waning?
We don't really know. There is so little, really indicators of what's going on inside of Russia, to be entirely honest, on the civil level. We can't really tell. I would assume that it's probably level because they make sure to keep the Ukraine war really out of the Russian public's mind these days on really the details, at least what we're seeing right now. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that well. And also, now someone's trying to debate that BRICS is winning because they don't have debt. And that is so interesting. That is so interesting. What is the Chinese national debt, guys? What is the Chinese national debt?
Also, I called that guy out on his comment right there, and he said, "Who's BS?" Oh, who are you talking to, man? It's like, dude, that doesn't scare me. You're literally typing something in the chat or something like that. I literally said you. He said, "Grow up." I said, "Okay, I'm growing up now. I'm growing up. Look." He's gone.
Man, so crazily enough, you're not going to believe this. China has a debt, a national debt, that is crazily enough almost as big as their GDP. It's 14 trillion.
Yeah, it's not shocking too, because China had to kickstart the whole basically inflating its own economy from somewhere, and they didn't get it from anybody else. They literally borrowed from themselves.
Yeah, it's like, does it sound like they're really rich to me? Because, yes, the United States has a big national debt, but that's compared to, well, when you compare it to our GDP, it isn't that big. Then China has one, and, of course, for them to be God's blessing to the earth, as some would like to say, they sure do have a lot of national debt as well. It's so crazy. Crazy, even. Crazy. But anyways, with that, we are on to the third to last question of the night.
All right, and this one is going to go to DT, who said, why don't they go after Russia's shadow fleet?
Generally because it's circumventing the sanctions that exist right now. There has to be some sort of a legal framework pretty much written down in some sort of a sanction for them to be able to go after those vessels. And that's why they're called the Shadow Fleet, because they're circumventing the sanctions that were laid out inside of the actual documents that defined what the sanction was. So that's why we really can't go after them right now. And so with that, we are on to the second to last question of the night.
And this one goes to Bromine Sidecar, who said, if Ukraine is trying to shut down Russian oil, why haven't they attacked the export terminals?
That's a good question. Why haven't they done that? I don't know. I'd actually have to declare ignorance on that one, because that seems like a pretty straightforward answer, and I don't know why they haven't done that yet. So that your guess is as good as mine, to be entirely honest with you. And so with that, we are on to the final question of the night. And so, who was the lucky last person to throw in the lucky last question of the night?
All right, so that one is going to go to Squee, who said, how do we explain the friendly fire that allegedly took down the FA-18 in the Red Sea? What is really going on?
What is really going on? What is really going on, guys? It's friendly fire. Like, that's the best way I can explain it. It happens. Like no matter what, it will always happen. Because before the Gulf War happened, everyone thought that friendly fire was not going to happen, and then it did, and it still happens today. It happened in Afghanistan a lot. It happened really everywhere, a good deal. No, not a good deal. It happened everywhere, but not to an extreme degree like the Russians, who have friendly fire incidents really daily at this point. We have them here and there. Usually they're publicized whenever they happen too, which makes them really well known. But beyond that, the reason why it was shot down was due to some sort of misidentification, due to some miscommunication. That's the best way I can explain it. Or it may have been a technical error on board the ship or the aircraft that made them misidentify the plane as hostile and shoot it down. But it's not perfect. A lot of people like to dog on the United States and say that we're incompetent, and then we're always competent, and then when we have one sliver of incompetence, they want to harp on it a great deal, and then act like the whole military sucks because of that. But the reality is that it is an error. Errors happen. They always do. To say that it doesn't happen would be ludicrous, because I'm pretty sure that all of y'all at some point have done something that wasn't the right way or was not a good way at your job or in your real life. And then once again, it goes to show there is room for error in everything. No one's perfect, and the military, while doing incredibly good, is not going to be perfect. So it generally is a friendly fire incident. A lot of people have been trying to get into it and say, the Iranians have a Super SAM that can shoot down American jets, and it's like, if that's the case, why didn't they shoot down all of the FA-18s? Why did they just shoot down one? And also, why in the world the United States say it was friendly fire? It would be a lot better for them to say that it was shot down by the Houthis, because then they could justify obliterating the shit out of them because they shot down an American aircraft and took a direct action against a U.S. asset and also lives that could have resulted in death and also resulted in great loss of a vehicle. So that would have justified further U.S. action. If it had been shot down by the Houthis, they would have just admitted it. They wouldn't have sat there and gone, oopsies, a little friendly fire, to hide that the Houthis shot it down, because, crazily enough, we don't really hide a lot. Like, for example, when U.S. soldiers got killed at Tanf, you didn't hear them go quiet and go, oh, it's fine, guys, forever. Like, they did that for like 2 days. They were like, oh, it's fine, nothing happened. And they were like, oh, actually, we got to tell you that 3 people got killed. And then they told everyone. If the U.S. jet had been shot down by a Houthi Super SAM, which does not exist, then we would have heard about that immediately, that it was shot down by the Houthis and not by a specific cruiser, the USS Gettysburg, in that carrier strike group. So I would say it's friendly fire. That's what's really really behind it. It's nothing that complicated. A lot of people always try and make it a lot deeper than it seems. It's pretty straightforward. They messed up. They shot down a friendly aircraft. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. And with that, that is the last words y'all are going to hear from me and Matthew until after the Christmas break. Today is the 22nd of December, our time. Tomorrow will be the 23rd, which is a Monday. We will be off that day. We will be off all day that day. I don't believe that we're even going to be making videos during the Christmas break because we really do want to have a bit of breathing room and get ready for running the channel probably for more months on end, pretty much without break 7 days a week, endlessly. We also are going to be back on the 26th of December. So we will be running a live stream this Thursday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, but in the meantime, we will be taking off that time for Christmas. And so with that, good night, good luck, take care, stay safe, Slava Ukraini, and long live the Leaf Spring Army, and the Leaf Spring Army will never die.
And with that, folks, once again, huge thanks for another successful Sunday night fundraiser stream. And also, Merry Christmas to all of you, and have a good Christmas. Enjoy your holidays. And also, we will see you all once again on Thursday night. And it's only a 3-day hiatus, so please don't go watch that filth on mainstream media. Just wait. We'll be back on Thursday. And also, we might actually have some short war videos out during the break. We will have to see how our time is going with that and see if we have the time for it. Because if we do, you'll probably be hearing from me on a short war video. If not, the Enforcer as well. So with that, folks, thank you all once again, and Slava Ukraine. Hiram Slava, and get some rest, and good night.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards